Chapter 896. Daly's probe to buy a dictionary late at night, in a city that's somewhat chaotic. Furthermore, I obviously look like someone from Intis. That really is rather dangerous. No, I can't keep wearing this glove. Danitz was stunned for a few seconds before he raised his hand and attempted to take off his boxing glove. When he was halfway done, he suddenly paused and sized up Anderson. When he saw him wearing a black glove on his left hand, he did a hollow chuckle and wore his glove again. I believe that in the southern continent, a place like this requires strength, Danitz added with a faint smile. Anderson's expression remained the same as he continued stroking his chin. Then, what do you plan on doing? Danitz pointed at the staircase and said, I plan on finding the hotel's boss and borrow his dictionary. I believe he will be teaching his children Dutonese. That's an idea worth pursuing. But even with a dictionary, you won't be able to master it anytime soon. Even if you grasp a few terms, it will still be rather difficult. After all, the language here is a completely different system from the northern continent, Anderson said with a TSK. Why don't I suggest a solution for you? Your captain has likely taught you some ritualistic magic in the God of Knowledge and Wisdom domain, right? Yes, Danitz replied with a nod without a second thought. Anderson clapped his hands and said. Danitz shook his head without hesitation. I believe in the Lord of Storms, and not the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. The reason why some of the ritualistic magic cast in the past had received a reply was because of Captain. Upon saying that, he shot Anderson a glance. Weren't you born in Seeger, growing up in Lenberg, being classmates with Captain? Then you should also be a believer of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Wouldn't it be more effective if you held the ritual? Anderson shook his head and laughed. Despite being believers all the same, those who can actually receive a reply are in the extreme minority. Seemingly in thought, he said, the best method is to find a priest or bishop from the Church of Knowledge. Get them to make some charms. I recall that there are a few pilgrims from Lenberg here in Baron's Harbor. Why don't we visit them tomorrow? Danitz was just about to say, yes, when he suddenly revealed a look of suspicion. I have this nagging feeling that you are up to something. Anderson's expression immediately froze. On the airship, Klein had his seatbelt buckled and had a blanket over him as he leaned against his seat, already in deep sleep. At this moment, it was dark outside. There was little light from the lands, and the scenery swept across slowly despite moving at a high speed. Everything appeared peaceful and silent. After an unknown period of time, Klein suddenly jolted awake as he stretched his neck. As he kept death knell on him, he had drank plenty of water. His bladder had woken him up. Pulling away his blanket and unbuckling his seatbelt, Klein covered his mouth and yawned. He walked out of the lounge and headed for the washroom at the corner of the hall. After relieving himself, he washed his hand and left the washroom. When he entered the hall, he suddenly saw a figure. The figure was standing amidst the shadows. It was wearing a black robe, and by its eyes were eyeshadow and blush. At a glance, it looked like a shadow or ghost that had floated out of a corpse. Ma'am Daly. Klein obviously recognized her as he immediately reacted as though he jumped in fright. Daly walked a few steps forward and looked up at Dwayne Dantes's face. She paused her gaze in between his eyes as she curled her mouth into a smile. Your eyes and bearing resembles a friend of mine. Especially the eyes. Klein immediately feigned enlightenment as he said with a smile, Ma'am, if our genders were swapped, that would be a standard way of hitting on someone. Daly's eyes didn't move away as she chortled. There's no need for any swapping. A difference in genders doesn't change the definition of such actions. If this were any other time, I really would be trying to trick you into a bed if I had said something like that, even tricking you all the way down the aisle. However, I have no such thoughts at the moment. I came over because yours eyes really remind me of him. It's really quite overwhelming speaking with Ma'am Daly. I can't let her lead the conversation. Otherwise, she might realize that Dwayne Dantes isn't the Casanova that has a wide preference or a romance expert. Instead, he's nothing but an inexperienced man in front of charming women. I have to take the lead in this conversation. Klein's mind stirred as he directly asked in a half-joking manner, Ma'am, do you like that friend of yours? Daly was taken aback for a second before she pricked her brows, lowered her head, and smiled. That's not something that needs hiding. If only he could be like you, being willing to take the initiative when facing a woman, proficient at creating a suggestive atmosphere. Perhaps if that were the case, we might already have children. Unfortunately, he's a conservative man. When he chats with me, all he spoke of was matters regarding work or his experiences. Any hints given to him or any joke that went overboard just made him appear uncomfortable. He often found excuses to leave. He looked old, and he didn't look after his hair. He also had a bad memory. He even forgot my birthday. Whenever I thought of him, I got mad, having the urge to push him down into bed, tying his arms to the bed's railing. Klein looked at Daly's head with a gloomy gaze as he sighed to interrupt her. "Ma'am, you've said too much." Daly looked up, speaking with a smile in no way different than before. "I thought you would enjoy talking about matters about this at a deeper level." Klein let out a soft chuckle. "Then why didn't you turn those thoughts into action? I can tell that you aren't just a woman who can only talk." Daly scoffed. "Guess." Following that, she nodded. "Thank you for not saying that I've been harassing you." As she spoke, she turned around and headed for the extensive lounge where the red gloves were. The corners of Klein's mouth curled up slightly as he returned to his room, shaking his head. When she came to the entrance of the extensive lounge, Daly, whose eyes landed on the floorboards, suddenly saw an untied shoelace. She shifted her gaze up as her eyes reflected the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell. Leonard glanced at Dwayne Dantes as he entered his lounge and said with a suppressed voice, "He has plenty of secrets. He's not a simple person." Daly chuckled and nodded. "I know." Having said that, she briskly walked past Leonard Mitchell and walked into the extensive lounge. When she covered a few meters, she slowed down her pace and once again lowered her head. Leonard remained standing at the door, watching the long dragged-out shadows that were cast from the lights outside. Slowly and silently, he exhaled. Inside the small lounge, Klein stood by the door, raising his right hand and rubbing his temples. He stood there like a statue. In the Berg household in the city of Silver, Derek sat on a stool, munching on bread that was made from black-faced grass powder, as he seriously listed down the matters that he had yet to complete in recent times. "I haven't obtained the information of the Bizarro Bane that Mr. World needs. I still lack the points required for the Sequence 5 Vampire Beyonder characteristic. I only have 3 friends. That's not enough. All the clues I have regarding the former chief's mausoleum aren't much." As the thoughts flashed through his mind, Derek filled his stomach and took off his shirt. Holding an open container that had been ground from stone, he used the sticky black liquid inside to smear on the obvious bruises on his body. Although the city of Silver only had edible black-faced grass in its vicinity, it didn't only have one type of plant. There were many kinds of plants, all of them being strange. By using different powers, they could grow and proliferate in the dark, sun-lacking environment that only had lightning. One of the traditions of the City of Silver was to select different plants and mix them with organs of monsters to create various kinds of ointments. They were especially effective when treating most injuries and illnesses. It prevented the residents from dying just because of a trivial problem. They were simplified versions of the magical medicine, holy ointment, and essential oil formulas that generations of demon hunters obtained from their potions. These low-level products thus became a tradition. Just after Derek applied the ointment and took a whiff of the pungent smell before putting on his clothes, he suddenly heard knocking at the door. His mind tensed up instinctively as he held up Thunder God's roar, the dark blue hammer that had electric sparks swirling around it. He carefully approached the door, prepared to kill any monsters that suddenly emerged from the darkness. "Who is it?" Derek asked in a deep voice. A gruff voice sounded from the outside. "Valor." At the same time, bright light beamed its way through the door cracks and windows. That was the power of a Dawn Paladin. Derek relaxed as he opened the door and greeted, "Valor, aren't you leading a patrol team today?" Valor stood 2 meters tall and was recently befriended by Derek. Derek was also most impressed with him because Valor was able to rein in his powers to a great extent, and was a person who took very good care of his companions. In addition, his patrol team's recent patrol area included the former chief's mausoleum. Valor had brownish-yellow hair that resembled Derek's and a thick beard. His favorite pastime was fighting with others. Upon hearing that, he said with a smile, "The 6-member council has just ordered our team to skip the area of the former chief's mausoleum. And this area is the last spot for our patrol mission. Let's go to the training field. Let's get some exercise." The 6-member council has specially ordered the patrolling teams to skip that area? They plan to open the former chief's entrance today? I wonder what will happen. I hope there's no sinister plot on Elder Lovia's side. Derek was alarmed as he hurriedly built connections, but he was at a loss. Just as he hesitantly wore his clothes in preparation to join Valor at the training field, a shadow grew out from the dark ends of the street and said, "Derek Berg, the chief has requested you visit him at the spire." Chapter 897. The chief's hint at the top of the spire, in the room that belonged to the chief. Colin Iliad had the tall body that was standard of the City of Silver. His hair was grizzled, unkempt, and rather disheveled. He had deep wrinkles around his cheeks, but there were no wrinkles elsewhere. Some old scars, that were either deep or twisted, remained on his cheeks. He wore a linen shirt on the inside with a brown coat draped over his body. By his waist was a belt filled with tiny compartments. His light blue eyes were deep, filled with the experiences and stories they had seen. After Derek bowed, the demon hunter nodded gently and pointed diagonally to the items placed on the table. "Do you still remember them?" Derek took a glance as his gaze suddenly froze. His eyes reflected two translucent worms that had the thickness of a child's finger. Worm of time. They were translucent worms of time with rings. They were worms of time that came from Blasphemer Amon's avatar. "Yes." Derek fell silent for a second before instinctively answering, "They were left behind by Amon." Colin Iliad nodded indiscernibly and said, "One of them was even coughed out by you." Without waiting for Derek to say a word, he continued in a thorough manner, "You once said that while being possessed by Amon, you were in a daze most of the time, as though you were in a dream. You were occasionally lucid." Faced with the chief's gaze, Derek nodded, indicating that he had given such a description before. Colin Iliad moved his gaze away and cast it out the window, looking down at the nearby buildings. "I believe I haven't told you the things you did during those times. You did a total of 2 rituals. One of them had elements of a secret deed, and the other one was like a sacrifice. You obtained a certain reply. Do you have any recollection of such things?" "Indeed, I was being monitored when I sought Mr. Fool's help and used the secret deed ritual to cleanse Amon's avatar." Derek wasn't surprised by what the chief was mentioning. He had long been advised by the Hanged Man that, based on the rich experience the City of Silver elders, it was impossible that they would dismiss someone acting abnormally. Thus, the conclusion that he had constantly been monitored after he left the dungeon was obtained. This was corroborated by the fact that someone had emerged from the shadows when doing the sacrificial ritual. "I don't have any recollections." Derek pretended to be in thought before he shook his head. Colin, who was observing him through the corner of his eye, turned his head over and said with a sigh, "Try recalling it carefully. These 2 worms left behind by Amon are materials of great value. I've been trying to find ways of using them. If I can secretly make them into items, this might be a trump card that no one else knows. It can play a crucial role at critical moments." During the 2 rituals you experienced, you might have symbols, ancient incantations, or mysterious elements that can be used for reference. Think about it carefully. If this were in the past, Derek would have only understood the chief superficially, but at this moment, he was able to interpret the hidden and indirect meaning behind the sentence, albeit being a few seconds slow. "I know there's still a certain connection between you and Amon. We will be opening the mausoleum to the former City of Silver chief. I need to prepare additional trump cards against any unexpected accidents or cause that Lovia and company to use to inflict any harm to the City of Silver. Try attempting communication." Mr. Hanged Man was right. The higher one's level is, the more experienced they are at handling danger, and the more accustomed they will be at expressing themselves by speaking in riddles. It's a way to leave options open for both parties. Derek suddenly felt he had grasped a particular technique. Upon realizing that the chief's goal was to limit Elder Lovia and how she represented the fallen creator, he felt that he needed to do something. However, he had 0 clue on how to use a worm of time. All he could do was consider praying to Mr. Fool and see if he could provide any help. "I'll try my best to recall. I need a silent room." As Derek spoke, he paused, deliberating over his words. Colin Iliad was apparently prepared as he pointed towards the corridor. "Many of the rooms across the corridor do not have people in them. Choose one yourself." "Yes, Your Excellency." Derek bowed and exited the room before entering an unused room. He locked the wooden door, sat down, and in the dark corner, prayed softly as his eyes emitted a soft glow. Desi Bay. Eskelson Harbor. Klein left the airship from the gangway with his suitcase in hand, prepared to head into the city on a carriage prepared by the military base. As for Daly Simone, Leonard Mitchell, and the other Red Gloves, They were the first batch to leave the airship. Klein had been arranged to be one of the last. Hence, they didn't meet each other. After entering the city and finding a hotel to stay in, he prepared to have some rest to remedy the poor sleep he had last night. Suddenly, he heard a series of illusory, stacked pleas. Sounds like little son. Klein yawned while covering his mouth and entered a cramped washroom. With great difficulty, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the gray fog. As he expected, the crimson star that was blinking and burgeoning was none other than the one that represented the sun. He emanated his spirituality to make contact with it, and he quickly learned what the sun's prayer was pertaining to. The city of Silver Chief is asking little son, no, asking what he thinks to be Amon on how to use a worm of time charm. Thankfully, I had such a question previously and have already gotten an answer. However, using the worm of time to create a potent charm that can temporarily exchange fates will require him to pray to the fool. Wouldn't this directly expose the fact that the one backing little son is not Amon, but some unknown hidden existence? Klein tapped the edge of the mottled table as he seriously considered how he was to answer. In less than a minute, he quickly reframed his line of thought and discovered that his worries were meaningless. Firstly, apart from Shepherd Elder Lovia, who can receive certain revelations from the true Creator, no one in the City of Silver knows Amon. All they might guess is that he is likely the Angel of Time, one of the 8 kings of angels that were by the Creator's side. Therefore, even if they learn of an existence called the Fool, they will probably believe that it's Amon's true body, or a deity that Amon now believes in. Secondly, the honorific name of the Fool is no longer a secret to the true Creator, Blasphemer Amon, and Shepherd Elder Lovia. It doesn't matter if more people from the City of Silver learns of it. Thirdly, the chief named Cullen Iliad is only a demon hunter. Even if he knows the honorific name of the Fool and has a grade 0 sealed artifact, there's nothing he can do. After all, Blasphemer Amon and the true Creator haven't been knocking at my door in the middle of the night. Finally, the 6-member council's chief is long aware of a problem with Little Sunday. He just hasn't made it obvious. As his thoughts raced, he felt that he needed to be bolder. Perhaps I can use this opportunity to develop another 1 or 2 downlines. No, I mean believers. Little Sun won't have to fight alone anymore in the future. Besides, I've already improved since the time when I wiped away Amon's avatar. I've also accumulated even deeper knowledge in mysticism. I wield the sea god scepter and can stir even more of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. I don't have to worry about missing anything when facing a sequence 4 demigod during the ritual. As long as I don't rashly pull him above the gray fog. Klein quickly made up his mind and cast the method to creating a fate siphon charm into the crimson star representing the sun. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of knocking resonated within the chief's room at the top of the spire. And before the knocking even sounded, Colin Iliad had already known that Derek Berg had opened the door and was walking over to his room. Come on in. He turned his body and faced the door. Derek pushed open the door and entered. Bowing, he said, Your Excellency, I've recalled some vague details. Colin Iliad nodded with a calm expression. What are they? Use pure silver and mercury as materials. Derek succinctly described the beginning of the ritual and paused. I think I muttered an honorific name back then. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Colin narrowed his eyes and immediately cut him off. The corresponding symbols are the ones left on the candle? Yes, Derek frankly replied. The second line is, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog. At this moment, Colin cut him off once again. Is there no need for other ritual materials? No, Derek nodded, feeling slightly puzzled. Only then did he realize that the chief was apparently deliberately stopping him from reciting Mr. Fool's honorific name. Yes, our common language is Jotun. It's a language that can stir the powers of nature. If I were to directly say out the honorific name, it would result in all kinds of unknown effects. I know that Mr. Fool is a true deity and trustworthy, so I was reciting it all out habitually. However, the chief doesn't know that. Derek continued, feeling somewhat enlightened. Third line, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Colin silently listened in silence before nodding. Very good. Although I cannot be sure that the content you recall is of any use, it's still a sizable contribution. I'll get someone to add to your contribution. Return, or go to the library to read some books for a while. Yes, Your Excellency.
Derek wore a deadpan look as he silently heaved a sigh of relief and rapidly retreated to the room at the top of the spire.
Colin Iliad watched him leave before heading behind his desk and sitting down.
He cast his gaze on the two translucent ringed worms in front of him.
Beside the worms was a notebook. Drawn on it was a secret symbol comprised of half a pupilless eye and half contorted lines. Colin's gaze remained fixed for a while, as though he had been petrified. After a while, he slowly stood up and took out 3 candles. Chapter 898. Response. After setting up the candles, Colin Iliad found a piece of pure silver and picked up a carving knife beside it. With steady strokes, he carved out a palm-sized charm vessel. Then, he followed Derek Berg's description, drawing the secret symbol of the Fool on both sides of the silver piece. The entire process was completed quickly. If an observer was watching, they wouldn't have been able to discern his actions. Yet, the final product didn't show any flaws. It looked like a piece of art that had been slowly carved out. Right on the heels of that, Colin Iliad found another bottle of mercury. Directly using his powerful spirituality, he guided the liquid inside to trickle into the charm and fill all the patterns. He prevented the mercury on the side facing down from dripping due to gravity. Repeating the process, he made a second charm. Colin Iliad placed them in front of the candles and placed a translucent ringed worm on each of them. Compared to him standing up silently, the present Colin's every move was stable, calm and firm. He didn't show any signs of hesitation, just like how he faced powerful monsters that came out of the darkness. After finishing the ritual, he took 2 steps back and removed the crossed swords that were hanging from the wall. He stabbed them into the crevices of the floor tiles at the door. He then closed his eyes and muttered. Pure and thick beams of light emerged out of the void as they enveloped the 2 swords with a holy and glorious feeling. The light beams increased in quantity, slowly transforming into liquid water that flowed across the cracks in the floor tiles and the walls, forming a cage that isolated him from the outside. As a senior demon hunter, Colin Iliad didn't wish to take such precautionary measures when holding a ritual. This was because there was a tiny chance of angering the target, bringing about dangerous developments. However, he had no choice but to do so because he needed to be certain that even if the ritual failed, even if the Fool was an existence filled with malice, and even if he were to die at the altar, he would not bring too much harm to the City of Silver. In regards to the defensive power of the cage, Colin was rather confident because this directly stemmed from a godlike sealed artifact, a crown which the giant King Ormer wore, proof of glory. This was one of the main reasons why the City of Silver could survive wave after wave of monster assaults in the Dark Ages. With all his preparations completed, solely using his spirituality, Colin Iliad used his desk as an altar and created a sacred and clean environment that no one could disturb. He then lit the 3 candles. The pale yellow light flickered as they reflected in his eyes. He bowed his head and scattered the plant powder, monster hide, and fur into the candle flame or lit them and threw them into a cauldron so as to please the secret existence he was about to pray to. Such acts weren't rare in the City of Silver. Known to all, there were rituals held that targeted the creator, but from time to time, certain residents would be enticed by unknown existences during their patrols or exploration, tempted to hold all kinds of rituals. Most of the latter was a passive act, but there were a few that were done proactively. On the one hand, the cumulative despair of not receiving any response from the creator had made them eager to grab onto any other existence to rely on, and on the other hand, many generations of the 6-member council had come to a common consensus that the creator who had abandoned the land might very well not return again. Seeking out other alternatives was something that had to be expedited, but unfortunately, such attempts only led to nothing or death, nothing else. And it was because of this reason that regardless of the difficulties faced or how many times they discovered cities that were destroyed because of evil gods, the City of Silver continued their exploration of regions that were further away. As for Colin Iliad himself, the discovery of the outsider, Jack, brought him an indescribable sense of surprise and hope. The encounters when they explored Afternoon Town and the prophecies of the Kings of Angels' ploy and the ecclesiastic had made him feel a more pressing sense of urgency. He no longer held hope for the creator's return. With the 2 reasons combined, along with Lovia's and Derek's abnormality, as well as the prophecy of the apocalypse, as chief of the 6-member council, senior demigod and powerful demon hunter, Colin Iliad had no choice but to attempt to dance on the edge of a knife. He had no choice but to consider making a transaction with a hidden existence. Silently exhaling, Colin took a step back and chanted with a weather-worn tone, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the grey fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray to you, praying for the strength that stems from mystery, and praying for the bestowment that stems from good luck.
I implore you to make these items on this altar turn into charms. Just as Colin spoke with a cadence of mystery, he saw the altar in front of him immediately turn dark. It was as though an indescribable godhood was emanating from the candle in the middle.
The candle's flame instantly burgeoned, but it failed to light the surroundings. Instead, it made everything turn illusory, making countless shapes produce seemingly non-existent transparent shadows as they covered every inch. High above this illusory world and countless figures, there were 7 lustrous brilliances of different colors spiraling. They seemed to possess immense knowledge. And above these 7 lustrous brilliances, there was an endless grayish-white fog, and sitting above was an ancient palace that looked down upon everything. Demon Hunter Colin temporarily forgot everything else as he stared intently at the scene above the altar. It was as though something that only existed in books or ancient tomes had taken a step through the illusory and entered reality, appearing before him. If he recalled correctly, this was likely the projection of the spirit world. Before the disaster, before the time the Creator abandoned this land, it was easy to observe and enter the spirit world. The spirit world now only existed in the City of Silver's textbooks and various records, but no one could touch it. At this moment, a creaking, illusory sound sounded. The ancient palace that overlooked the gray fog and spirit world seemed to open its doors. Right on the heels of that, Colin saw the unformed charms in front of the candle produce a grayish luster. Their patterns were then lit up, as they intercrossed with each other, suddenly bursting into a blinding radiance, enveloping the pure silver foils and the ringed worms. The dark world above the entire altar also instantly warped. Everything was quickly restored to normal as 2 strange black crystalline charms appeared on the altar. They were like a pair of eyes of some existence that silently observed the world. Demon Hunter Colin was taken aback as he retracted his gaze and bowed his head. With a deep voice he said, "Thank you for your blessings, praise you." He didn't delay as he immediately ended the ritual and removed the seal. After doing all of this City of Silver chief of the 6-member council returned to the desk and picked up the 2 charms made from the 2 Amon avatar remnants. At this moment, his mind was still fixated on the scene he had previously seen. Based on his knowledge in mysticism, those that were situated high in the spirit world were mentioned to be the 7 lights in ancient tomes. They were believed to be close to that of deities, but none of the records indicated what was above the 7 lights or what the gray fog represented. They didn't indicate what the ancient palace which was enveloped by the gray fog while overlooking the entire spirit world represented. And during the entire ritual, Colin Iliad only felt that the fool he was praying to was staid, mysterious, and almighty, nothing like the evil beings who often like to express their powers as though eager to showcase something. Such a performance had a close parallel in the records of the City of Silver, the Creator. As he looked at the charms in hand and his condition, the grizzled demon hunter Colin suddenly closed his eyes as figures flashed past his mind for some reason. They were his father, mother, elder brother, younger sister, oldest son, youngest son, daughter, and oldest grandson whose lives he had personally ended. This already old chief remained silent for a very long time before he suddenly sighed softly. It's been 2,583 years. After 2,583 years, the City of Silver had finally received a normal response. In the library in the steeple, Derek was in the ancient myth section. He often browsed when he saw a notebook he had never seen before. This notebook's cover was made from a particular monster's hide. There were clear patterns on it, and the pages inside were old and yellowed. The records included the experiences of the original author when he encountered different monsters. These monsters were mostly accessible among the City of Silver's textbooks. Even their special traits were the same. However, the thoughts and experiences from the numerous battles left Derek reading in relish as he read seriously. As he flipped through it, he suddenly noticed a monster named Shapeshifter. Such monsters didn't come equipped with the intelligence to communicate, but they were adept at setting up traps to deal with targets. Furthermore, they could disguise as others, using what seemed like fascinating methods to complete a hunt. The notebook's owner had commented on them as being bizarre and dangerous. This is very similar to Mr. World's guess of the Bizarro Bane's traits. Could Shapeshifter be the Bizarro Bane? Derek felt delighted as he quickly read the rest of the entry. He discovered that this type of monster lived towards the north, in a faraway city's ruins. And the monsters in that area's darkness were powerful and terrifying. Even the 6-member council wasn't able to deal with some of them. Therefore, after 2 attempts, the City of Silver paused any exploration of the area. To date, Exploration of the area hadn't been resumed. Due to such reasons, the City of Silver's textbooks didn't make mention of the unique monsters there. After reading the record, Derek subconsciously flipped the notebook to the last page, wishing to know who had experienced the two harrowing explorations. As he flipped through it, he saw a name, Colin Iliad. Desi County. Eskelson Haba. Klein returned to the real world, rubbed his temples, and collapsed into bed. To give the City of Silver's chief a better impression of the fool and generate more trust, he had proactively added some special effects when responding, expressing the might of the mysterious space above the gray fog during the secret deed ritual and sacrificial and bestowment ritual. This expended quite a sizable amount of his spirituality, exhausting him. I'll find food for creeping hunger when I wake up. I'll let it have a good nap above the gray fog. Klein thought in his stupor and soon fell asleep. He was woken up by his rumbling tummy after sleeping from morning to the afternoon. Chapter 899. Berserk Sea's spirit world. The ingredients used for Desi's pies are much more generous than in Backlund. However, they prefer adding some local spices. It felt a little odd when taking the first few bites, but after getting used to it, it's quite a different style. Klein sat inside his hotel and swapped between taking a mouthful of the oily pie and drinking a mouthful of cool, refreshing sweet iced tea. He was living quite an idyllic life. After he had his fill, he didn't immediately pack up. He picked up the top hat on the chair beside him and wore it. Meanwhile, his left palm suddenly turned transparent as his entire body faded away. Klein had entered the spirit world and was planning on traveling to the Pato harbor in the Berserk Sea. He was there to seek out food for creeping hunger. Eskelson, where he was, did belong to Desi Bay, but it was nowhere along the coast since it was an island. This was the southernmost island of Desi Bay, and going past it meant one's entry into the Berserk Sea. Therefore, the second Klein headed for the predetermined coordinates. An abnormal sight appeared before his eyes. The spirit world's airflows seemed to be materialized as they spun into a wind. They howled as they enveloped a huge region that seemed boundless. It was dim inside, with layers of dark clouds. Bolts of lightning tainted with the deep gloom kept flashing, illuminating the surrounding area like it was the apocalypse. At that moment, Klein felt as though he had arrived in a sea that was eternally ravaged by storms. However, he knew with certainty that this was the spirit world. Indeed, it's just like what many books on mysticism mention. The power involved with the perishing of death has not only changed the atmospheric weather of the sea between the northern continent and southern continent, but it also filled it with disaster and danger. It's how its name was derived. Furthermore, it also broke the barrier between reality and the illusory, tainting and damaging the corresponding spirit world and causing them to affect one another. In the Berserk Sea, if one holds a ritual that involves the spirit world, using powers related to the spirit world, there will be a high probability of an accident occurring, causing unimaginable developments. Klein reflected poignantly as he used his eyes to verify what the books wrote. From his point of view, if it weren't because of this, the various countries in the northern continent wouldn't have waited for Emperor Roselle to find the safe sea route before they had a chance of invading the southern continent. After all, to most high-sequence beyonders, they could easily traverse normal kinds of natural barriers. Roselle's safe sea route wasn't simply geological in nature, but also mysticism in nature. This also meant that since the Berserk Sea and Spirit World were influencing each other and overlapped, Klein could directly use the local sea maps to traverse the spirit world's calamities. Recalling the content he had read before, Klein found the correct location and entered the dark spirit world. The howling of the gales sounded from every direction. Even the secondary gusts of wind left a chill running deep down from Klein's soul or spine. This made him believe that if he had traveled in a spirit body state without the use of the Black Emperor card, Tyrant card, and Azek's copper whistle to augment himself, there was quite a good chance of him suffering a serious injury. And if this wasn't the safe sea route, he believed that there was a chance his physical body couldn't withstand the black storms that were filled with death. Compared to the gales, the dark lightning bolts were far more dangerous. Klein suspected that he couldn't even withstand being smote by one of them. As for the hidden maelstrom and the wandering creatures, they were another form of danger. This is a place without any material seawater. I wonder what's at the end of the maelstrom. Klein followed the safe sea route and traversed the land at an adequate speed. From time to time, he would survey his surroundings to broaden his horizons. Suddenly, he saw a strange creature. It was dragging a huge sickle and was situated inside a black hurricane. As it was formed by individual skulls, it was swollen and massive. The skulls were either grayish-white or grayish-black of varying sizes. They were also from different species, and all of them were stacked into one, forming its torso, limbs, and head. Almost at the same moment that Klein saw this strange creature, it also discovered Klein. All the skulls turned their heads in unison, producing a grinding sound that couldn't be concealed. The dark eye sockets were countless in number as they followed and overlapped one another. Klein's forehead throbbed as he used traveling to pass through the area, entering the next safe sea route. And on the nearby illusory sea, bloody arms and illusory greenish-black tentacles extended out from the sea surface. Outside the City of Silver, a black mausoleum stood inverted over the ground like an inverted pyramid. At that moment, there were all kinds of dense black plants that grew out from the cracks in the mausoleum's bricks. Even the heavy door by the entrance was covered with them. Colin Iliad had 2 swords slung across his back as he stood with 2 other elders of the 6-member council. They were observing the passage that diagonally led them deep underground. Lovia with her silver curly hair watched silently for a moment before saying, "It should be possible already." Unlike how she usually switched randomly between 2 mental states, this shepherd elder was now staid and calm. She didn't show any signs of abnormalities as her pale gray eyes were deep and placid. Colin gently nodded and took out a bottle of medicine from 2 different compartments on his belt. Unscrewing the lids, he downed them. His light blue eyes rapidly brightened. His unwrinkled skin had blood vessels protrude as they got tinted with silver. Right on the heels of that, the chief drew a sword and smeared a silver-gray ointment across its surface. As he took steps to prepare, another 6-member council elder, Wait Chermont, did something similar. This bald man who had a tattooed symbol on his head stood nearly 2.5 meters tall. He didn't look a day over 45. But in fact, he was nearly 80. He was also a Sequence 4 demon hunter, a demigod that was one of the main pillars of support for the City of Silver. In the City of Silver, due to the lack of main ingredients, and with the citizens being aware of the acting method and having sufficient combat experience, they advanced from low to mid-sequences rather easily. Sequence 6 Beyonders were the majority, but from Sequence 5 onwards, due to the rituals required and other reasons, the number of Beyonders drastically fell. At Sequence 4 where there was a qualitative change, an entire generation might not even produce one. Wait Chermont didn't dual-wield like an orthodox demon hunter. This allowed him to use different ointments to produce different effects, so as to handle more complicated situations. He wielded an iron-gray hammer, and on his back was a huge bow that was equally as massive as his body. He was like a miniaturized giant that walked out of an oil painting. The bow was a mystical item, one that didn't have overly severe side effects. In the historical records of the City of Silver, it received its name from killing a dragon at the demigod level. Its name was Dragon-Slaying Bow. After finishing their preparations, Wait slammed his hammer in front of him loudly, drew his bow, and slowly pulled it back. Sizzling bolts of lightning suddenly emerged as they condensed into one, and as it grew longer from the pull, it formed a blinding and radiant arrow between the bowstring and the back of the bow. Just as Wait's fingers released the bowstring, the lightning arrow shot straight to the mausoleum's door, which was overrun with human hair-like weeds. Silently, the heavy door appeared to have long rotten. It exploded into pieces along with the electric bolt's explosion, revealing a deep passageway. This passageway shimmered with pale white lights. It extended far beyond what one's eyes could see, giving off a creepy and cold feeling. Colin's eyes suddenly flashed with 2 complex, dark green symbols, and he reflected the mausoleum's entrance in them. A few seconds later, he held his sword diagonally and walked into the mausoleum. Wait slung his dragon-slaying bow, picked up his hammer, and followed closely behind. The purple-robed Lovia's expression remained the same as she followed through the shattered door at a decent pace with her hands empty. As they descended via sections of passageways and staircases, the 3 members of the 6-member council didn't show any unrest or anxiety in the completely silent environment. They allowed their footsteps to echo in their surroundings. After descending 1 level, they suddenly saw a river before them. It was an illusory and jet-black river. Under the river's surface were blood-colored arms that had been skinned. Green baby-faced veins and slippery tentacles with eyes were densely entwined together. They kept flailing upwards in a bid to grab whatever passed them. The river was close to the side of the entrance. There were figures of different heights wearing old clothes with their backs facing the 3 elders. They kept walking back and forth as though they were vexed over the crossing of the river. Suddenly, one of them sensed the trio approaching them. He slowly turned his body to look at Colin, Wait, and Lovia. It was an elder with his hair being completely white. His forehead and the corners of his mouth were deeply wrinkled. His eyes were light blue and hollow. His expression was numb and blank. Colin Iliad's pupils shrank as he recognized the man. It was his brother, the brother that had been possessed by Amon. He had personally ended his life. At this moment, the other figures turned around, revealing faces that Colin, Wait, and Lovia found extremely familiar. But they were all abnormally numbed faces. Lovia's expression remained unperturbed, but behind her, an illusory knight more than 5 meters tall had appeared at some point in time. This knight wore ancient silver full-body armor. Its eyes were red like blood as they burned akin to flames. After traversing the safe sea route, for about 10 seconds, Klein arrived at the Berserk Sea's Porto Harbor. This place deviated from the main sea route and didn't belong to any country. It was a free city for pirates. When his feet hit solid rock, he randomly produced a face, but he wasn't in a rush to enter the port city which had buildings randomly laid out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an iron cigar case. While passing through the Berserk Sea's spirit world, he had sensed Azek's copper whistle trembling slightly. Removing the wall of spirituality, Klein opened the cigar case and took out the ancient and exquisite copper whistle. This copper whistle had lost its usual coldness and mildness, and it was now burning hot. However, this anomaly was rapidly dissipating. Chapter 900, Self-Recommendation. The abnormality associated with the Berserk Sea is suspected to be a result of the perishing of death. Legend has it that this deity's corpse and items are hidden somewhere in these waters, awaiting someone with a special key to open it. This copper whistle came from Mr. Azek, and Mr. Azek is indeed a direct descendant of death, as well as being from the first or second generation. Therefore, this copper whistle had sensed something or had been influenced. Thoughts flashed across Klein's mind as they coalesced today to form a theory. He planned on finding an inn in Porto Harbor, head above the grey fog, and use dream divination to attempt to obtain a revelation. Then, he would consider the time and method for returning to Eskelsen Harbor. It was to prevent himself from encountering any avoidable accidents. And before that, he needed to seek out food for creeping hunger. After walking down the seaside cliff, Klein entered Porto Harbor. The buildings here were pretty much built anywhere one desired. There was almost zero planning, causing the roads to be very wide or narrow to the point that it only allowed a single-person passage. In certain areas, one couldn't see the sky when looking up, only to see a swath of clothes that were hung up to dry. Wearing a new face, Klein strolled through such an environment with many pedestrians dressed in pirates' attire. He then habitually headed for the bar to seek out prey. At this moment, he saw several people gathered at a notice board on a square up ahead. What's happening? With his curiosity piqued, Klein approached the area. Using his balance and agility as a clown, he passed through the gaps of the crowd before he barely arrived at a spot where he could see the notice board. On the notice board, there was a piece of paper that was overbearing, covering all the other pieces of paper. It was obvious at a glance. Its title was, The Black Emperor's Crew Recruitment. The Black Emperor? Isn't that the ship of King of the Five Seas, Nast? The one that can traverse the spirit world? Considering how he can be considered the king of pirates, he's actually openly recruiting crew members? Klein was rather surprised as he deliberately spoke out with a suppressed voice. How is that possible? Why not? A stout man beside him with his arm exposed from his rolled-up sleeves laughed out loud. It might be impossible in the past, but it's possible now. Why? Klein was hoping that someone would respond. Immediately, he turned his head and asked. The stout man had tattoos all over his arms and cheeks, making him look fierce. Upon hearing that, he pointed at the main sea route's direction and said, A week ago, the Black Emperor and Lone's highly promoted steam ironclad warship, the Pritz, met and clashed in a sea battle. The Black Emperor had many casualties and are in dire need of more manpower. Ah! Klein's first reaction was that it didn't make mystical sense. Based on the published content in the papers and the rumors he had heard out at sea, he knew that the Pritz was a warship in the normal sense. It lacked any beyonder elements. Perhaps in terms of physical damage, it was stronger than the Black Emperor, but the latter could use the spirit world to leap, just like a large-sized version of a traveler. There was no ordinary armament that could damage it. Furthermore,
King of the Five Seas Nast was likely a Sequence 3 demigod of the Black Emperor paths of the divine. He was the most infamous powerhouse at sea. He could directly distort the trajectories of cannonballs, making him nearly invincible when facing a fleet that wasn't in any sense mystical. From Klein's point of view, they were enemies at two completely different levels. Yet, the final outcome was not something he could imagine. He didn't hide his astonishment as he blurted, "What about the Pritz?" The fierce-looking man shook his head and replied, "I'm not too sure, but I heard that it wasn't damaged. Only 2 corvettes were sunk." Klein was first taken aback before he came to a slight understanding of what happened. He recalled the situation of him robbing the Tutmosis II mummy. The military's demigod had used the law that had the power of mysteriousness weakened and the real strengthened. Once this came into effect, the Black Emperor was just a sailboat that was a little special with some extraordinariness.
It definitely couldn't beat an ironclad warship. Neither could it flee.
This also meant that the Pritz had a demigod existence on the military side, or else such a law wouldn't have come into effect. To be able to get the Black Emperor to flee under such a situation, King of the Five Seas Nast must be very, very strong.
Below angels, he's definitely one of the strongest.
From the looks of it, due to the existence of the Arbiter pathway, the trajectory of this world's military development remains close to that of Earth's. It wouldn't reach a point of not being able to defeat a slightly higher-level mysticism opponent. Klein nodded in enlightenment as he didn't inquire further. As for Beyonders below Sequence 4, in a large-scale battle, apart from the few jobs that could take on the role of outputting offensive firepower or carry out effective defenses, the rest could only avoid a direct clash.
They would then be the cleanup crew, or simply provide support.
For example, a marionettist with all his marionettes feared no one in a mid-sequence Beyonder battle if fighting one-on-one. But once he was on a battlefield with shells hurtling everywhere and machine gun fire sweeping the area, the problem of being physically weak became a problem. Even with paper figurine substitutes, one was unable to escape the range of gunfire, thus suffering a second round of damage. Under such situations, it might be too late to use paper figurine substitutes again. In such intense battles, the most effective mid-sequence Beyonders are wraiths. They aren't afraid of cannonballs or bullets, nor are they afraid of being discovered by enemies.
Furthermore, they have shriek which can affect a huge area.
Klein allowed his thoughts to wander when the man from before continued speaking. "You're also thinking of joining the Black Emperor?"
"I'm still not sure," Klein casually replied.
The stout man who was covered in tattoos said in excitement, "I have plans on giving it a try anyway. There aren't more than 10 people here who are better at fighting than me here.
I have rich experience as a pirate. They'll definitely pick me.
However, I won't stay on the Black Emperor for too long. There are too many meaningless rules, such as not being able to plunder or kill defenseless people. Or something as silly as not being able to drag a woman you like unless it's mutual."
"Did you hear that? Is that anything like a pirate?"
Although the King of the Five Seas is one of the 4 kings and is publicly acknowledged as the Pirate King, those rules are just like dogs hit.
"I'm already used to leading a real pirate's life. I like it that way and will not change.
I'm only tempted to join because I heard that it's possible for the Black Emperor crew to obtain supernatural powers. When the time comes, I'll leave and form my own pirate crew." As this man spoke excessively, he suddenly realized the stranger's expression turn a little odd. He hesitated for a moment and asked, "Why are you looking at me like that?" The silver-gray glistening sword slashed down suddenly, pinning down a blank-faced figure to the ground. The figure warped and squirmed and gradually dissipated into illusory blobs of light amidst swirling silver light.
Colin Iliad retracted his sword and stood straight up.
Observing his surroundings, he saw that Waite and Lovia had separately finished their corresponding targets.
A region had been cleanly cleared out by the riverside.
At this point, above the illusory, eerie black river, a dark boat cruised over.
It silently docked by the bank.
Upon seeing this scene, Colin slowly exhaled as he muttered with a solemn expression, "Ferryman?" He had spent quite a long amount of time with the former chief, and they knew each other rather well. They both knew that the other was troubled by the City of Silver's absence of the Sequence 3 of the Giant Pathway, Silver Night Potion Formula. This prevented people from advancing once they reached the level of a demigod. They had thoughts of switching to a neighboring sequence, and this plan had seen the light of hope during a particular expedition. This was because they found the Sequence 3 potion formula of the Phoenix Pathway.
Ferryman.
From that moment forth, the former chief began building the mausoleum, and eventually took up residence inside before sealing the entrance. Observing silently with dark green symbols in his eyes, Colin Iliad said heavily, "Let's cross the river on the boat."
Wait and Lovia didn't express any objections, fully trusting the chief's judgment.
They followed closely behind him and boarded the dark and strange boat. During this process, the three didn't show any hesitation or observe their surroundings, nor did they pause. It was as though this wasn't an exploration but a visit with a destination in mind. The boat slowly began moving across the ink-black water surface, leaving a long trail in its wake. The bloody arms and the slimy tentacles wildly reached upwards and slammed into the boat, but they failed to leave any marks.
They failed to leave any influence. In just over 10 seconds, the three elders of the 6-member council arrived on the other bank of the illusory river. There was an altar there with a heavy, iron-black coffin placed on it. Colin Iliad immediately jumped off the boat and reached out for his other sword. Like before, he appeared cautious, not underestimating anything. Following that, Wade held his iron-gray hammer and landed heavily on the bank. He left the surrounding soil quaking in an obvious manner. He looked at the monster skull that embraced the gigantic coffin, took 2 steps, and placed the hammer in front of him. He then removed the dragon-slaying bow behind him. At this point, Wade suddenly felt the back of his palm itching. He subconsciously looked down and saw that his hair follicles had fine white hair stained with yellowish oil growing from within as they grew in size. Porto Harbor. After Klein fed creeping hunger and found a rowdy inn, he got a room that could barely be considered clean. Then he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the grey fog. Sitting in the fool's chair, Klein first picked up the projection of Azek's copper whistle and conjured a pen and paper before writing a corresponding divination statement. The reason for this copper whistle's abnormality today. Chapter 901. The mutated paper figurine. Klein didn't bring Azek's copper whistle directly above the grey fog this time, but he did plan on doing it the same way he did back when he first divined the mutated sun's sacred emblem. He completed it by using an object's projection. Although this would decrease the accuracy to a certain extent, causing the divination to fail at obtaining any effective revelation, it guaranteed that the item was undamaged thanks to the grey fog being an intermediary layer. He still recalled the time back when he divined the origins of the black ear that came from the listener. This sealed artifact had suffered retaliation from the true creator, causing it to crumble and reform into a charm. Therefore, with the suspicion that the divination result could point to Death's corpse or other remains, a godhood power of a sequence 0 that had long perished but was still capable of changing the Berserk Sea's environment, Klein decided to leave Azek's copper whistle in the real world and divine using a projection. This was to avoid the possibility of damaging such an important item. After all, Death and the true creator were at the same level. As for why Klein dared to directly use Grozel's travels to divine its origins, it was because the ancient god, Dragon of Imagination, had long since perished. Its corresponding characteristic had likely been inherited by someone else and changed hands several times. Furthermore, the book itself was extremely strong. Even a blast of the sea god's scepter at full strength could hardly damage it. By the same logic, Mr. Dor was likely only a king of angels and was in an exiled and quarantined state. He could only barely send out his ravings, making it impossible for him to deal any actual damage. With the help of the power of the mysterious space above the grey fog, I can quickly recover from the damage and corruption without any lasting repercussions. If Azek's copper whistle were to be destroyed, it would truly be gone. I wouldn't be able to contact Mr. Azek again and use it to attract the undead. I won't even be able to carry it around with me. Klein very calmly and skillfully held the copper whistle's projection and the paper with the divination statement in hand before leaning back into his chair. Half closing his eyes, he chanted softly in a state of cogitation, the reason for this copper whistle's abnormality today. After chanting it 7 times, Klein fell into a deep sleep and entered the dream world. After an unknown period of time, he saw a dark and gloomy mausoleum. He saw a dark-colored staircase that extended downwards and coffins placed around it. The coffins were all open with dead bodies in them. On their backs grew white feathers that were stained with pale yellow oil. Even in the dream, Klein found the scene abnormally familiar, as though he had once seen it before. At that moment, he seemed to smell the putrid smell of rot and hear the slow breathing of some object. He felt that the darkness in the mausoleum was thickening, giving him an acute feeling of deathly silence. Suddenly, ravings that were both loud and soft sounded at the same time.
The corpses in the coffins with white feathers on their backs floated up together, and using their half-rotten and half-pale faces, they looked out of the dream. With his heart skipping a beat, Klein lost control of his heart, as though it was grabbed by invisible hands and was ripped straight out of his chest. During this process, his dream collapsed into fragments as it returned to nothingness. And the final scene Klein saw was that, not only were the corpses growing white feathers on their backs and other parts of their body, there were thin illusory black tubes that stabbed into their bodies. They extended deep into the mausoleum where an endless cold, sinister, black fog emanated. The black fog slowly contracted and expanded, producing panting sounds. When the commotion from this scene landed in Klein's eyes and ears, the color in his skin rapidly drained. It left his skin rotting and overflowing with pus. It made his pores produce thin and dense white feathers that were stained with pale yellow oil. It made the projection of Azek's copper whistle in his hand shatter into a blob of black fog. The long mottled table in the ancient palace rotted and collapsed as the 22 high-backed chairs were enveloped by white feathers as though they had a life of their own. Seeing the endless gray fog silently churn, the mysterious space above this gently stirred, quickly restoring everything to normal. It was as though nothing had happened. Klein, who had collapsed to the side of the chair, reached out his hand and grabbed the table leg and slowly stood up. Sitting back in his chair, he exhaled slowly. He rubbed his temples and subconsciously did a comparison. Weaker than the true creator and eternal blazing sun, but stronger than Mr. Door. However, I'm not sure if it's because the latter was exiled and quarantined, which minimized the amount of power transmitted over. Why am I thinking about these comparisons? It's not like I'm their match. It will still be the same even if I become a demigod. Unfortunately, I didn't directly see the object hidden in the black fog. Otherwise, I might be able to obtain some potion formulas or mysticism knowledge. Klein felt a baffling sense of regret as he cast his gaze to the side of his chair. He saw an illusory black fog floating there. It was the remnants after the shattering of the projection of Azek's copper whistle. There's no sensation of strength, which means it can't be used as a charm. What is its use? Klein thought of something else as he summoned a backup paper angel from his junk pile and cast it onto the illusory black fog. The moment the two made contact, they immediately fused together. The paper figurine quickly turned black and appeared serene and quiet. On its back grew white feathers that were stained with pale yellow oil. Such a change was only maintained for a second. The paper figurine returned to its original state, but it didn't seem corporeal, as though it was half illusory. Apart from that, there were feather-like patterns that covered the paper figurine's back. What can this be used for? Klein made the mutated paper figurine land back in his palm. He didn't dare to use divination to determine its effects, afraid to see the scene from his dream before, allowing the now prepared object from deep inside the black fog to invade where he was. After repeated checks, Klein used his knowledge in mysticism to determine something. This doesn't contain any powers itself, but it's substantially unique. Perhaps it can create special effects that are related to the undead domain when used as a paper figurine substitute or paper angel. It's like my adventurer's harmonica. Although it doesn't contain any strength, it can summon a messenger with great strength. Klein immediately put away the mutated paper figurine and began interpreting the scene from his dream. Black mausoleum, open coffins, corpses with feathers on their back, black fog emanating deep inside. These revelations seem to point towards death or something important that death left behind. Or perhaps it's a certain product of the numinous episcopate's artificial death. Right, why did I find what I saw familiar? Klein carefully recalled and quickly found an answer. He had seen a similar scene in a particular divination a long time ago. That time, the contents of his divination was the result of hiding matters related to Mr. Azek from the Nighthawks. Back then, he had seen two scenes in his dream. One was of himself falling into a sea of blood and being pulled out by Azek. The other was them finding themselves in a dark and gloomy mausoleum, looking as though they were searching for something. Klein had once tried interpreting it, believing that the first scene represented him in danger and being rescued by Mr. Azek. The second scene represented them exploring a mausoleum or somewhere that symbolized a mausoleum together. The former had been verified during the meteor that came falling from the skies in Backlund. The latter finally revealed clues today. Could it be that the place that Mr. Azek and I will be exploring is the mausoleum that I just saw? But this mausoleum is very dangerous. The object in the deepest part of the black fog has a very high level. It's only slightly weaker than true deities. Furthermore, it's filled with malevolence.
Klein knitted his brows bit by bit, believing that their exploration together wasn't naturally a good thing. This made him believe that it was necessary for him to stop Mr. Azik. However, he also suspected that the divination scene he saw couldn't be avoided. Otherwise, a worse outcome would happen in a dramatic way of having destiny unfold. At least during my first divination, there was only the exploration scene and no appearance of danger. Perhaps there's a way to circumvent it. This might be why seers are often so vague. At times, being too clear might backfire. Klein planned on vaguely mentioning his dream without providing any interpretation when he met Mr. Azik again and allowing him to share his views. After making up his mind, Klein leaned back and looked at the dome of the magnificent palace before vanishing from above the gray fog. Light, shattered light and the pure light of dawn, emitted from the elder of the six-member council, the other demon hunter, Wade Chermont's body. It dissolved the white feathers that grew out of the pores of his skin as he suppressed the subsequent squirming of his flesh and blood. His arm muscles swelled as he pulled the bowstring of the dragon-slaying bow, allowing silver electric bolts and the dawn of light to mesh into a dazzling arrow. The arrow flew out and instantly reached the altar, which was piled with monster skulls. It hit the heavy, iron-black coffin. Silently, the arrow's beam dimmed and vanished without leaving any effect. No, the area around the altar was turning darker and more gloomy. Inside the iron-black coffin, a sound that resembled bones rubbing against each other sounded, "Why? Why are you disturbing my slumber?" Upon hearing this, Wade's heart instantly became heavy. This was because there was no hint of hiding its malevolent intent, and that it also meant that the former chief might have transformed into a monster. The City of Silver's attempt at salvation had once again failed. With a bang, the coffin's lid flew up and shattered into pieces. A large wave of black fog emanated out from beneath in an incessant manner. Amidst this scene, Wade saw a figure slowly stand up from within the coffin. He was nearly 4 meters tall and his limbs were long. His body was covered in white feathers that were tainted with faint yellow oil. Behind his back were thin illusory black tubes that connected out into infinity. Behind the 3 members of the 6-member council, a huge wave stirred in the pitch-black river. All sorts of arms, tentacles, and veins surged over. At this moment, Wade saw the chief's body transform rapidly and saw his bulging muscles tear his clothes inch by inch. Chapter 902. Shadow. In just a blink of an eye, Colin Iliad had transformed into a 4-meter-tall giant. His skin was bluish-black and muscular. Every inch of his skin, pores, and flesh seemed to violate the normal confines of a human body. It was a unique combination that possessed an unimaginable shock factor. This wasn't something that could be described superficially or in dimensions, as apart from quantitative terms like length, breadth, height, there was information, strength, and spirituality as measurement quantities. They were directly presented and seemed to be rich with complicated mystical patterns, symbols, and labels. But in fact, there wasn't any change. The former was just a partial image that humans received due to them lacking the ability to sense and discern him. But even so, to face such a creature directly, humans without any godhood would still be corrupted by the spirituality, having their minds thrashed. A common outcome would either be death on the spot or going completely mad. And it was precisely due to this fact that this creature was known in mysticism as mythical creature. However, at that moment, Colin Iliad's head didn't experience any obvious changes. All it did was swell up significantly, and the area from his forehead to nose cracked open with a black vertical eye-like rift. Before reaching sequence 2, the mythical creature form of a demigod was incomplete. Faced with a powerhouse of this level, the advantages and disadvantages of taking such a form was obvious. On the one hand, this enhanced one's strength and level significantly. On the other hand, it would result in intense madness and provide strong inclinations towards losing control. It was a non-trivial test of one's rationality. It wasn't something those with insufficient willpower could withstand. Therefore, most saints would consider transforming into an incomplete mythical creature only if they were forced into a corner. And it wouldn't just be the transformation of a particular part of their bodies. To them, such an action was an attempt at dancing on the edge of a knife. It easily led to a loss of control. Therefore, caution was imperative. Most of the time there were 2 extremes. One extreme was the minority who indulged in their desires and expressed their evil side fully. The other was the kind who had extremely strong willpower and a resilient mind. Once the former produced the mythical creature form,
It was equivalent to them losing control with no way of transforming back. The latter could use their mythical creature form as a rather normal battle tactic, without the fear of losing control and the threat of madness. Of course, something rather normal wasn't normal. It still wasn't something that could be used frequently. This was because, for people who danced at the edge of the abyss, they would only deepen the erosion on them with each attempt. It wasn't something that could be completely avoided just because they could handle the negative effects. Among the City of Silver's 6-member council, Chief Colin Iliad was one of the few who could control his mythical creature form as a demon hunter. He held the 2 swords that were slathered with different ointments. Just taking a step forward with his right foot sent the land shaking as he leaped up towards the top of the altar. He then pounced towards the former chief whose body was covered in white feathers. His giant-like body's interior and exterior produced dawn-like light that scattered the surrounding darkness, purifying the harrowing creatures that were in the illusionary river behind them. At the same time, Wade Chermont kept drawing his dragon-slaying bow, strafing around the former chief that had transformed into an unknown monster with blinding silver lightning arrows. Lovia had already closed her eyes. The 5-meter-tall silver-armored knight behind her had phased away. Dragging the illusory greatsword, it charged straight at the altar, producing cracks that overflowed with silver light. In addition to that, at the shepherd elder's feet, the shadows that curled into a bundle suddenly began squirming as though they had come to life. It quickly left Lovia, and amidst the environment intermixing with darkness and the dawn, it followed the eeriness and quickly headed for the iron-black coffin above the altar. However, its target didn't seem to be the mutated former chief, but the thin illusory black tubes that were stabbed into his body while extending into infinity. Moments after Klein returned to the real world, he heard the loud sounds of waves crashing. He heard the prostitutes on the streets screaming in horror without any signs of calming down. Slightly surprised, he walked to the window and, through the gap of 2 messily built buildings, saw lead-colored clouds stacked together as waves swarmed the area beyond Pato Harbor. A black hurricane extended from the surface of the sea to the air, tainted with dark silver lightning as it silently destroyed everything. It was like a door that led to the apocalypse had finally been opened. And inside the port city, the void had turned translucent. Skulls with open mouths, vines with baby faces, bloody arms, and strange slimy tentacles with teeth were slamming at the boundary between the illusory and reality. It was thrilling and horrendous. This made many pirates tremble in the knees as they didn't dare stay on the streets. All of them rushed into nearby buildings. The seemingly invisible wraiths and shadows flew around, appearing from time to time. Coming close to the ears of different targets, they attempted to scream but were unable to make contact. At that moment, Pato Harbor seemed to fall into the hell known as the underworld. It was eerie, dark, chaotic, and crazy. Klein frowned slightly, having had a guess as to what was happening. He quickly retracted his gaze and directed the remnant beam straight into the former chief's dual swords. Lovia stood there with her eyes closed without showing any signs of panic or fear. Instead, she slowly sighed. In the City of Generosity biome, Alger Wilson circled around many times in order to escape any imaginary trackers or monitors before arriving at the artisan's residence. He pulled the doorbell. He had heard that the artisan had recently been infected by a disease and strange snoopers had appeared in the vicinity. Alger's first suspicion was the Demonist sect, but on careful thought, he felt that the artisan had no way to withstand the temptation of their charm based on his preferences. There was no need for the demonesses to go through such a complicated and roundabout manner. All they needed to do was curl their fingers and showcase their charm, and he would divulge and agree to everything. Therefore, Alger believed that there was another reason for the matter. He needed to see it for himself to prevent the delivery of the mystical item from being delayed. He didn't wish to lose the characteristic and materials for no good reason. Amidst the ringing of the doorbell, the artisan's main door opened. A thin and tanned middle-aged glanced at Alger and said, "Why are you here?" This person was none other than Artisan Sealf, who had worked with Alger for many years. His background was unknown. "Didn't you say you were sick?" Alger asked, seemingly casual. Sealf yawned and said, "I'm already better." Alger was taken aback as he looked around. "Where's that strange snooper?" Sealf's eye bags were a little puffy as his brown eyes revealed looks of fatigue and impatience. "Who the hell knows? There's been no sign of the snooper anyway. In short, I'll be moving soon. It's too dangerous here." Alger heaved a sigh of relief. "That's good." He paused for a moment before saying, "Aren't you inviting me for a cup?"
A fellow like you who only seeks high-proof alcohol has no way of appreciating fine wine. Sylph pulled at his flaxen-colored hair and moved to the side to make way.
Alger walked in staidly, and with just one glance, he had taken in the entire area into his eyes.
You don't have to. It's not like you will contact them again. You will receive a new life. All right.
2 buildings away, Alger sat on a long bench in someone's garden, cupping his right hand to his ear as he heard the conversation that came with the wind.
West Balam. Baron's Harbour. Outside a seemingly ordinary house.
It's really due to your bad relationship with the Church of Knowledge that you're egging me on to come here to request for a language comprehension charm?
Danitz wiped the sweat from his forehead as he looked at Anderson, feeling unnerved.
Anderson said in a self-deprecating and unfazed manner, "You shouldn't describe it as bad." "Then hostile?"
Danitz blurted out, cutting off his sentence.
Anderson shot him a glance and said, "The negative effects of your boxing glove might not be as easily bearable as you imagine it to be." He paused and added with a chuckle, "A more accurate description is that, be it me or the people from the Church of Knowledge, neither one of us wishes to interact with one another."
Danitz used one hand to clench his boxing glove and said, seemingly stumped, "But how should I request for the charm? Do I just head straight to a clergyman of the Church of an Orthodox God and mention something about mysticism? I'll end up locked up." Danitz was somewhat rash at the moment, but he was in no way dumb. Anderson threw up his hands. "Simple. Just directly mention my name. Then indicate that you came to West Balam for some pressing matter and do not have the time to learn Deutonese, nor do you dare to hire a local interpreter. Therefore, all you could do was seek their help, hoping that you could receive a few language comprehension charms. During this process, you must showcase your knowledge of many northern continent languages, making the priests know that it's not that you lack the ability to learn Deutonese, but that you just lack the time to do it. Then they will test you. When that happens, all you need to do is get a good score and you'll receive the charms." Test. Upon hearing this familiar term, Danitz's temples throbbed as he forced a smile. "You aren't going yourself because you're afraid of the tests, aren't you?" His original intent was to randomly use some words to conceal his discomfort, but he ended up seeing Anderson's expression freeze. "From the looks of it, there's still something you're afraid of." Danitz chortled inwardly as he was suddenly filled with confidence.
He took large strides into the ordinary house and discovered that its interior was more of an amalgamation of classrooms, and not a land of preaching for the Church of Knowledge in Balam.
Then, he saw a grizzled elder. Although this man wasn't wearing the clergyman robes of the Church of Knowledge, just his unique scholarly air convinced Danitz that he was at least a bishop. He had experienced similar vibes from his captain. "Hello there." Without covering himself with a hood, Danitz walked over with a smile while dressed in a commoner's attire.
The elder silently watched him approach before slowly saying, "Danitz."
Danitz paused and froze on the spot. His mind was filled with questions like, "He knows me.
How does he know me?
Isn't my bounty only limited to the sea?" The elder glanced at him and asked, "You are here for language comprehension charms?"
"Yes." Danitz nodded with a blank look, suddenly having the feeling that he had 0 secrets in front of the elder.
The scholarly old gentleman nodded gently. "Are you planning on heading to the places ruled by Catamia and May Sanchez?"
"Yes."
Danitz continued his blank expression. The elder took out 4 brass charms from his pocket. "These can be used for 2 months. They should be enough." Danitz received it with a blank look and after a few seconds said, "That's it." "It's that simple? Isn't there supposed to be a test?" "You don't want it?" the scholarly elder asked with a smile.
"No, it's not that."
Danitz suddenly shook his head, and before his brain could react, he had already asked, "How do you know me? How do you know I want language comprehension charms?"
The elder wore a few looks of pity in his eyes as he slowly said, "Your captain contacted me. She said that you refused to stop no matter how much they called out to you when you left the ship, rushing straight into the harbor.
She had actually prepared a few language comprehension charms for you."
As he spoke, the man shook his head, the look in his eyes somewhat ambivalent.
It was as though he was looking at a student who was often careless in class. "I should have long realized that. Captain is such a meticulous person. It's impossible for her not to consider the problem of the language barrier." Danitz resisted the urge to slap himself. When the elder saw the changes in Danitz's expression, he shook his head and asked, It probably wasn't your own idea to seek help here, right? I was about to use divination to find you. Ah, right. It was suggested by Anderson Hood, Danitz immediately replied. The elder was taken aback for a second before his expression turned ashen. At that moment, Anderson was sitting outside in the shade. He had snapped a tree branch and was casually drawing on a barren patch among the grass as he leisurely waited for Danitz to come out. He had no doubts that this unqualified hunter could obtain the language comprehension charms. This was because, as long as Danitz mentioned Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina, everything would become much simpler. The only difference was how many rounds of tests he needed to take. Just as he finished drawing King of the North Ulysson's head, he heard a familiar gait coming from the inside. Anderson's branch-wielding hand paused for a second when he looked up and turned to the door. He saw Danitz holding a stack of paper, walking over with mixed emotions. You failed the test. Anderson gave a sincere smile, having zero concern over the failure to obtain the language comprehension charms. Danitz shook his head blankly. There wasn't a test. Anderson was first taken aback as he asked with immediate enlightenment, "Help from your captain?" Danitz tersely confirmed it as he handed the stack of paper to Anderson and said, "This is what the bishop wishes me to inform you. A real hunter doesn't only rely on instinct or solely focus on the prey's information. They also need to learn how to grasp the prey's psyche and use all kinds of additional information. This is the information he wants to give you." Anderson's expression became contorted for a brief moment before it was restored to normal. He chuckled and said, "Thankfully that's not much." Danitz's lips quivered as he finally held back the laughter that rose within him. He said with seriousness, "That's only the table of contents. That bishop said that you should try to finish reading all the books mentioned in it within 2 years." Anderson's smile finally froze. Desi Bay. Eskelson Harbor. Klein was like any normal southern continent tourist. He bought tickets to East Balam, boarded a hybrid steam and sail liner with many cannons. With a hum, the ship left the harbor and quickly entered the Berserk Sea. Midway, Klein discovered the Lone Kingdom's Desi fleet patrolling the safe sea route as though they were guarding against something. From the looks of it, the abnormality in the Berserk Sea has garnered the attention of the Lone military. This way, the numinous episcopate likely has no way of investigating these waters without problems. Of course, a fleet is unable to monitor the entire stretch of the sea route. Klein stood inside his cabin as he looked at the scenery outside, thinking in enlightenment and poignancy. At this moment, he heard stacked illusory pleas. He hurriedly headed above the gray fog to check on it. The prayer was from the hanged man. He requested Mr. Fool to inform the hermit that the artisan was suspected to be controlled by a cult or secret organization, and that he wished to receive some help from her. Chapter 904. Analysis. The artisan is suspected to be under the control of a cult or secret organization. Yet, he's trying to get the hermit's help? Just get the world. Who knows which waters the future is in at the moment and how long it would take to reach there. What's more, the world can teleport. After hearing the hanged man's prayers, Klein subconsciously rebutted his request, believing that it would delay an opportunity, causing unnecessary losses. He then calmed down, believing that with Mr. Hanged Man's attention to detail and experience, it was impossible for him to commit such a simple error. Since he believed that he definitely had his reasons for requesting the hermit's help instead of the world. This also means that Mr. Hanged Man has determined that the matter hasn't reached a critical state that requires immediate action. He even wishes to observe further to find more clues and details. Besides, since Ma'am Hermit had offered to provide help in advance, it means that she believes that, for the time being, her region of activity would overlap with Mr. Hanged Man's. If anything really happens, she would be able to rush there at the fastest speed possible. Or does she too have powers similar to teleport? But that's a very low possibility. Klein tapped the edges of the mottled table, believing that he should trust Mr. Hanged Man's experience. Of course, this also included the fact that Mr. Hanged Man hadn't described in detail about his discoveries or areas of suspicion, preventing him from inferring or divining the truth of the matter. As his thoughts stirred, Klein threw the Hanged Man's prayer scene into the crimson star representing the hermit. As he was waiting for Admiral of Stars to reply, he suddenly saw the star representing the sun suddenly contract and expand as it produced stacked layers of prayers. The City of Silver's exploration of the former chief's mausoleum has some preliminary results? Klein made a guess as he emanated his spirituality over.
In accordance with his expectations, Little Sun began recounting everything that had happened after the 3 members of the 6-member council opened the former chief's mausoleum. This included encountering the souls of their deceased relatives, the river they crossed which hid countless strange creatures, and how they faced the incomplete mythical creature form of the former chief whose body was covered in white feathers. It also included Shepherd Lovia's separation of a shadow in an attempt to pounce onto the illusory tubes that extended out of the former chief's body. However, she was stopped when Colin Iliad used the fate siphon charm, swapping his and the former chief's fate for a brief moment, causing a difference in outcomes.
Thin illusory black tubes. White feathers stained with pale yellow oil. This sounds familiar.
Yes, wasn't this the main characteristic in the scene I saw when I divined the abnormality with Azek's copper whistle? And the reason that former chief built the mausoleum was to switch to sequence 3 ferrymen of the death pathway. As Klein listened, his mind raced, joining the dots together and considering what kind of conclusion he could receive from that. Soon, he had a bold guess. The mutation of the City of Silver's former chief had a certain connection with the numinous Episcopate's artificial death project. Although this conclusion sounded inexplicable and unbelievable since the City of Silver was situated in the completed isolated forsaken land of the gods, it was a place that could only be entered through certain means via the giant king's court and ruins of the Battle of the Gods.
Even the 7 deities couldn't find it or have the power to infiltrate it.
However, the numerous similarities made Klein, who was sensitive to coincidences, combine the actions of Shepherd Elder Lovia in the operation, and eliminate the other possibilities so as to seriously consider what the 2 seemingly unconnected matters might possibly point towards. From the scene that he received from divination and the experiences of having white feather grow from the pores of the back of his hands when he summoned the failed product of artificial death, as well as the encounter of the 3 City of Silver elders, he began suspecting that the numinous Episcopate's attempt might have achieved success to a certain degree. Through a series of sacrificial rituals and the transformation of their own high-sequence beyonders, they influenced death's remains via backward propagation, causing that abstract, illusory uniqueness which represented a deity's authority to generate some form of sentience. This allowed the object that was only a totem and a concept to come to life. Hence, this unintelligent object that couldn't be considered artificial death had begun assimilating the entire ritual, eagerly exerting its influence on lower sequence beyonders of the same pathway. After reaching certain conditions, the object hidden in the depths of the black fog could extend thin illusory black tubes, establishing connections with the target, and draw upon their strength to transform their bodies. And this method might involve the underworld or something special about death's domain. It could circumvent the force that isolated the forsaken land of the gods and make effective contact with the beings within. Therefore, the shadow that Shepherd Elder Lovia had produced was a bestowment of the true creator. Its goal was to follow the thin illusory black tubes on the former chief's body and trace the remains of the corrupted death? Perhaps this was how the Mother Tree of Desire replaced the chained god back then and seized the corresponding authority. Thankfully, the current chief of the City of Silver has a very clear mind. He knew ahead of time to seek out the secret existence backing Little Sun for help. By using the fate siphon charm, he remarkably foiled the true creator's ploy. From the looks of it, the 2 powerful sealed artifacts of the City of Silver are good at purification. They're able to stop the shadow that can corrupt death's remains. As the fool, I seem to have crossed the true creator once again. Of course, Amon will be the one taking the blame since the Worm of Time was contributed by him. Through Little Sun's description and relying on his own interference, Klein roughly figured out the hidden conflict that happened during the City of Silver's exploratory operation. Meanwhile, he also gained a first look at Shepherd Elder's mental condition. To Lovia, thin illusory black tubes that lead to the outside world was undoubtedly the key to the City of Silver's escape from the forsaken land of the gods. Therefore, she was very certain of her actions this time, without showing any signs of regret. She would only believe that the chief was the one who shattered that hope. It's not too terrifying to have someone do evil deeds. What's most terrifying is when people who have a martyrish mentality do evil they believe to be right. Klein couldn't help but sigh inwardly. As for why Little Sun knew what happened inside the mausoleum so clearly, it was obvious that Chief Colin Iliad had informed him during a casual chat. At this point, Derek had already recounted how the 3 elders had retrieved a special sealed artifact. It was a Beyonder characteristic left behind by the former chief that had fused with his bones. The former chief was from the giant pathway, beginning from Sequence 9 Warrior to Sequence 4 Demon Hunter. The ferryman potion he consumed corresponds to the death pathway's Sequence 3. The two Beyonder characteristics mixed together must be weirder and more varied than a single pathway. Together with the added effects of artificial death, the final sealed artifact must be very powerful. Of course, the negative effects will probably be equally powerful. Yes, back when the Black Illusory River was described, the various weird creatures likely corresponded to the underworld. This is similar to the scene I saw in the Berserk Sea. It's also similar in effect to what Miss Sharon's mystical item created. As Klein thought about it, he listened to Little Sun wrap up the topic of the exploration before mentioning the monster known as Shapeshifter. After Derek finished describing it, Klein felt that shapeshifters were very likely Bizarro Banes. He hurriedly summoned a gold coin from the junk pile and did a divination to confirm his guess. With Little Sun's current strength, there's no way for him to head to that city to hunt it. I can only wait until that chief prays to the fool once again or seeks help via Little Sun. Anyway, there's no rush. I haven't found the spirit world plunderer yet. Klein nodded indiscernibly. After requesting Mr. Fool to pass the corresponding information to Mr. World, Derek said that he had enough points and could soon exchange for the Beyonder characteristic for Sequence 5 Vampire and complete the three-party transaction, so he requested that Mr. Moon prepare himself. On the Future, which was slowly cruising across the waters of the Rorsted archipelago, Admiral of Stars Katlia thanked Mr. Fool and nudged the glasses on her nose. Opening the window to the captain's cabin, she shouted to everyone, "Turn towards Byam." After issuing the command, this pirate admiral curled the corners of her mouth. She finally had the chance to establish a long-term cooperation with an artisan. But at that moment, she suddenly thought of a problem. If she easily received the help of an artisan, would Frank Lee, who hadn't been able to obtain a Sequence 5 potion formula, attempt to make the Druid Beyonder characteristic into an item to expedite his paused experiments? That's not a good thing. Katlia subconsciously raised her hand and pinched her forehead. On the liner, Klein, who had finished handling the matters, focused on enjoying his trip. Due to the Berserk Sea's abnormal change in weather, the liner he was on board had chosen to take a further and more roundabout sea route that was much safer. Furthermore, it was to dock at a harbor named Halman for the night. Klein didn't alight and remained at a windowside table at the upper levels restaurant to have his dinner. While waiting for his food, he casually looked out the window and took in the local night skyline. Suddenly, he discovered a suspicious figure with a luggage bag preparing to board the ship. The reason why he appeared suspicious wasn't only because the man was wearing a black overcoat and tall top hat, but that he wore a scarf that wrapped his face, hiding his physical features. All that was left were a pair of eyes. And that pair of eyes were peeled to the ground, preventing anyone from discerning his actual appearance. Chapter 905. Psychological blind spot. Based on his experience from watching many detective animations, Klein believed that someone who wore a scarf to conceal his face and hid his physical characteristics with an overcoat was likely problematic. He probably hid an unspeakable secret, especially when it wasn't winter yet and the temperature in the Berserk Sea couldn't be considered cold. However, this has nothing to do with me. Even if a locked room murder mystery happens, the one having a headache would be the captain. I should head above the gray fog later to do a divination and see if this trip will be smooth. Klein didn't mind the matter, but he still thought about it conscientiously. He retracted his gaze and looked at the desi roasted fish that was being served by the waiter. After having dinner, he returned to his cabin and completed a divination above the gray fog. He obtained the conclusion that there wouldn't be drastic changes to the environment he was in and that everything would happen smoothly. This allowed Klein to fall asleep peacefully without relying on cogitation as he slept till daybreak. With a whistle from the steam engine, the liner began moving and departing Halman Harbor. The harbor could still be vaguely seen as Klein saw a figure there. The figure wore a white shirt and a dark blue coat. He had a rather high nose, deeply recessed eyes, light blue eyes, and brown curly hair. His face was rather cut and his chin was slightly raised. He gave off a supercilious look. With a sweep of his gaze, he quickly locked onto the liner which Klein was on. At this moment, the sky suddenly darkened as though a door leading into the pitch-black land of illusions had formed. A deafening typhoon stirred up from the seabed, surging upwards with massive amounts of blue mass. Dark lightning flashed like rifts in the void. They kept appearing and kept healing themselves until they disappeared. This completely blocked the vision of those on the liner and at the harbor, putting them in two seemingly different worlds. The Berserk Sea had once again shown its horror. The liner failed to avoid or resist, and it could only continue cruising forward along the safe sea route that had relatively weaker storms.
What a coincidence. This likely isn't a coincidence.
Standing behind the window of his cabin, Klein first sighed inwardly before coming to the conclusion that this sudden anomaly in the Berserk Sea was due to unnatural reasons. Although it was common for the weather in the Berserk Sea to change suddenly without notice, to actually change at a particular point in time still left one suspicious. The man at the dock is tracking the suspicious tourist from last night? And that tourist decided to change the weather upon realizing that he had been exposed, doing so that he can force the liner to leave? Klein made a guess when he made the connection. And if that really were the case, it means that the suspicious passenger who hid his face with a scarf might very well be a demigod or someone who carried a Grade 1 sealed artifact. After all, with Klein's present strength and items, it was impossible for him to trigger such a weather anomaly without the use of Sea God's scepter. Of course, he also had other means like throwing out Azek's copper whistle to see if he could cause the entire Berserk Sea to go berserk.
Seriously? I just want to be a normal tycoon that's heading to the southern continent. Why would I encounter a pursuit at the level of demigods? Sigh, I'm under too much stress that my sequence doesn't deserve. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and finally chose to believe the divination he made last night. Amidst the storm, the wobbling liner cruised along a rather calm stretch with apocalyptic scenes around it. And most of the tourists wore calm looks as though they were very accustomed to such conditions. Only a few people who were on their first trip across the Berserk Sea were trembling, grabbing tightly to anything they could grab at. Time ticked by as the gales and lightning gradually calmed down. Bit by bit, the sky brightened. At this moment, Klein, who was on the deck, felt his spiritual perception trigger. He subconsciously looked in the direction of Halman Harbor. Above the undulating dark blue waves, beneath white scattered clouds, there was a white radiant flame flying over at high speeds from afar. The flame increased in size and became increasingly clearer until it revealed its complete form. It was a gigantic flaming spear. The flaming spear tore across the sky and landed at the bow of the liner's deck. However, it didn't ignite anything. It burnt through half a wooden plank and spread out before materializing into a figure. The figure had a high nose, deeply recessed eyes, and blue eyes. He was none other than the man who had previously appeared at the dock. He looked middle-aged as he slowly surveyed the area and walked through the wide-eyed and agape tourists before walking into the cabin. The similarly agape Dwayne Dantes silently heaved a sigh of relief when he confirmed that the person wasn't here for him. The way he appeared sure is cool. As expected of a demigod. Now, the only issue is that they do not come to blows. Even if the conflict cannot be helped, it's best they go to a neighboring sea to fight. Otherwise, there's no way this ship can withstand it. I can teleport away quite successfully, but all these tourists. I'll only be able to save a few. Klein habitually drew the sign of the crimson moon on his chest, praying for the goddess to bless them. Just as he had such a thought, he saw a figure fly out of the cabin, slamming heavily onto the deck. It was none other than the suspicious tourist who had covered his face with a scarf. This man had already revealed half his face. The tip of his nose was red and he had a thick beard around his mouth with saliva staining them. His nearly triangular eyes were filled with horror. He held his hands to the deck as he kept crawling backward. Who got you to carry that item and put on such a disguise? At the cabin's entrance, the middle-aged man with the high nose and blue eyes slowly walked out. He spoke in Intis with a heavy voice. The suspicious tourist shook his head frantically. No, I don't know. He was also wearing the same. He gave me £100 to take this ship to the southern continent before returning by myself. The middle-aged man silently watched with his penetrating glare that seemed to tear through his soul. This made the tourist break out into a sweat as his body convulsed. He once again stammered his explanation, but there weren't any changes to it. The man retracted his gaze before his body burst into white radiant flames. Following that, he transformed into a gigantic flaming spear and shot towards the region where Halman Harbor was. The flaming spear quickly disappeared into the distance, leaving a twinkling speck. During this entire process, apart from at the very beginning, the demigod didn't take a second look at the surroundings tourists. It was as though they never existed. A simple but smart ruse. By getting someone to disguise as himself and board the ship, then using certain means to control the weather, thus creating proof that he's on the ship, but in actual fact, he had been at the harbor the entire time. Once the enemy starts the pursuit, He can then attempt to escape. Enlightened, Klein made a judgment. This made him suspect if the pursuee was once a conspirer, magician, or other beyonder that was good at coming up with ruses. As for the person who transformed into a burning white spear, his arrogance, detestable nature, and his usage of the Intis language had made Klein believe that he was probably a demigod from the hunter pathway. It was possible that he was an iron-blooded knight. I've no idea why there was a conflict. Klein shook his head and returned to his cabin. On the deck, the tourists finally snapped to their senses as they discussed the supernatural phenomenon they had just seen in murmurs. A person could transform into a flame, and the flame could reform into a human. Amidst the noisy commotion, the liner continued cruising forward on the safe sea route. It didn't encounter any accidents midway, and it arrived at another harbor at midnight. Like usual, Klein didn't alight, afraid that he would encounter something. He took out his gold pocket watch and opened it to determine the time to head to the restaurant. Another half an hour.
Klein silently muttered to himself as he looked up and out the window. At this moment, many tourists who were bound for this harbor were heading for the dock along the gangway with their luggage in hand. As he swept his gaze, Klein's gaze suddenly stopped on a figure. The figure wore a black bonnet. He had dark golden sideburns. His lips were tightly pursed and his facial features were clear and distinct, like an ancient classical sculpture without any wrinkles. He wasn't carrying any luggage, and soon, he stepped onto the dock with the crowd, disappearing into the corner of the road. Klein just watched motionlessly, as though his body wasn't his. He felt every drop of his blood turn cold as a name appeared in his mind. Insanguil.
The street lamps on the harbor had already lit up. The liner's many windows also lit up in concert with them. Dwayne Dantes was waiting inside a first-class cabin in darkness and silence.
Klein had already sat down without showing any emotion.
All kinds of thoughts couldn't help but flash across his mind. This is the first time I'm discovering signs of Insanguil after the great smog of Backlund. The demigod from before was probably tracking Insanguil. His tricks are more profound than I thought. He found someone to disguise as him and gave him items not to divert his trackers, but to create a mental blind spot. It made one subconsciously eliminate this ship from the possible options. He was here from the beginning. That coincidental change in weather was likely created by Insanguil with 0-08. Why would he be pursued by an Intis hunter demigod? What is he plotting? Amidst his churning thoughts, Klein suddenly took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew it. Silently, Miss Messenger Rionette Tynker with her 4 blonde red-eyed heads in hand appeared before him. Klein opened his mouth before closing them again. Picking up a pen he quickly wrote, Mr. Dwayne Dantes has discovered traces of Insanguil on Waypoint Island in the Berserk Sea. Folding the letter, Klein handed it along with a gold coin to Miss Messenger. Send it to the mailbox at Backlund's 7 Pinster Street. The 4 heads in Rionette Tynker's hand turned at the same time as the 8 eyes looked at Klein. She didn't say anything and bit onto the letter and gold coin. Chapter 906. Leonard's Warning. Backlund, Northborough. The pitch-black night had the crimson moon covered by clouds.
There were only street lamps on the 2 sides of the road that emitted a faint light, illuminating the road ahead and the doors of the nearby houses. 7 Pinster Street's mailbox was silently hiding in the intersection between light and dark, bathing in a cool breeze that blew from the side as though it was in a slumber. At this moment, newspapers, bills, and letters from various unknown people suddenly spewed out from its mouth. These objects seemed to be dragged by an invisible hand as they floated in midair before flying towards the door and entering through a gap. Inside the house, at the foyer, the newspapers automatically spread open as they rapidly flipped over. Then, they were casually left on the chair, stacking over other newspapers. The bills and letters continued flying into the living room, with the former quickly stopping. With a few shakes, they floated to the surface of the coffee table and lined up. The latter had their envelopes removed, and the letters without envelopes quickly unfolded themselves, showcasing themselves in midair. After a while, a portion of these letters flew onto a rack on the first-floor study. Some rushed for the scissors to help it cut itself apart. Then, they orderly surged into the washroom and were thrown into the toilet. Whoosh! The mechanical flush of the toilet was automatically depressed, washing away the paper shreds into the sewers. 7 Pinster Street went back to normal, and its silence was identical to an uninhabited houses. Southern Continent. East Balham. Colane City.
Leonard Mitchell, who had just arrived, was resting in a residence arranged by the local church of Evernight. Suddenly that slightly aged voice sounded in his mind. "Punk, you have an important letter." "What letter?" While Leonard asked softly, he already had a guess in mind.
To mail an important letter to 7 Pinster Street without caring that it was inhabited, there was only one, no, 2 people, Klein Moretti and Dwayne Dantes. As for why the old man named Pallas Zoroast could still clearly read the letter sent to 7th Pinster Street despite the Berserk Sea and half the northern continent separating them, Leonard had only a guess or two. This was because he had helped the old man capture a specter before. With regards to this, his theory was, old man definitely used a worm of time to parasitize that specter, making it his eyes, ears and mouth in the northern continent.
At that moment, Pallas Zoroast replied to his question. "It's from Klein Moretti."
He said that while Dwayne Dantes was heading to the southern continent, he discovered traces of Inzanguil on Waypoint Island in the Berserk Sea.
Leonard fell silent immediately as his mouth turned agape. However, he didn't say a word.
After a long while, he muttered with a slightly hoarse voice. As expected, he didn't forget the need for revenge.
"What can I do?" "What can you do? You're only a sequence 6. Even if Inzanguil doesn't wield 0-08, you still lack the qualifications to exact vengeance on him. He just needs to reveal his mythical creature form to make you lose control and become a lunatic. The chances of you getting your revenge are 0. This is the qualitative change that godhood brings," Pallas Zoroast said rather sternly. He paused before chuckling. "Thankfully, you understand yourself in a way that's better than before. In the past, you definitely would have said that you would inform the church with news of Inzanguil and join the team to pursue him. And now, you know to ask what you can do." Leonard had wanted to retort a few times, but he ultimately didn't say a word.
Pallas Zoroast continued. "What you can do for now is to give Klein Moretti some information.
Wait for him to write back to you. Then, based on the arrangements written, provide the necessary assistance. So no finding excuses so as to inform the church of Inzanguil's location?" Leonard heavily asked, somewhat surprised.
Pallas Zoroast chuckled and said, "No hurry.
Do it at the critical moment. Although 0-08 enjoys causing its possessor's death, it doesn't wish to be sealed even more so. As long as you inform the church of Inzanguil's location and begin a pursuit, it will immediately learn of it and make the necessary arrangements. Regarding this, you need to warn Klein Moretti."
Leonard was taken aback for a second as he asked, "Old man, you seem to know 0-08 rather well."
"It wasn't apparent in the past." Pallas' slightly aged voice chuckled. "Of course I am. During the 4th epoch, 0-08 had once caused the death of an angel. I can't tell you too much because once you know of it, it will also know you. The more you know about it, the more likely you will become a character in its stories." Leonard came to an actual realization of 0-08's terror from old man's vague words. This had already exceeded the mysticism he knew. After some thought, Leonard asked habitually, "Then how should I hint to Klein Moretti without letting 0-08 know? Or that even if he were to know, it will be very superficial knowledge, making me a bystander in the story?" Just as he said that, Leonard clasped his hands and gritted his teeth. Without waiting for old man's reply, he continued, "An indirect hint? I'll tell him I'll temporarily not inform the church of Inzanguil's location. I believe he should be able to understand that there's a problem based on the situation. He will understand that we need to be extremely cautious. And even if he fails to interpret that, his secret organization has members who understand the 4th epoch well enough to provide him with help. Also, just writing the sentence, 'Once you know it, it will also know you,' without mentioning 0-08 should be enough for Klein to guess what this is pointing at." After Pallas Zoroast finished listening, he chuckled and said, "Humans will only grow under pressure." Leonard exhaled and sat up. He found a pen and paper and penned his thoughts. Following that, he set up a ritual right on the heels of that and summoned Gehrman Sparrow's messenger. Berserk Sea. Waypoint Island. On a liner docked at the harbor. Many tourists weren't alighting. They were huddled in the lower deck cabins, waiting to arrive at the southern continent to begin a life filled with hope. They had gone through a great deal of effort to save up the fare for a ship ride that spanned a few short days. They were from loan and were those who had been forced to take such risks. Klein, who was acting as the tycoon, Dwayne Dantes, wasn't like them. He lived in a spacious, clean first-class cabin that could even be described as luxurious. Under some candlelight, he opened the letter that had just been delivered by Rionette Tynker. Will not be informing the Church of Inzangwil's location for the time being.
To Leonard, although the source of the tip might put him in certain danger, it's not impossible for him to do it.
Didn't he join the Red Gloves to seek revenge?
This means that he has a reason why he can't sound the alarm on Inzangwil. As Klein thought, he continued reading the rest of the letter. Once you know it, it will also know you.
Suddenly, Klein exclaimed, finding the description somewhat familiar. This is very similar to the Twilight Hermit Order.
Any mention of it will be known.
So, 0-08 is a sealed artifact of the Spectator Pathway? Leonard isn't informing the Church of this matter because he's held back by this. He wishes to wait for a better opportunity? This is likely something the grandpa in his body told him. Klein nodded in thought, feeling thankful that he hadn't asked Rionette Tynker for help moments ago. That would have been equally dangerous for Miss Messenger. Besides, most important of all, I haven't made any preparations. If I were to only rely on a helper I hire, my plan might very well be detected by 0-08 ahead of time. A series of coincidences would then be created, producing a targeted arrangement. Klein silently sighed and felt that he needed to do something, but he was at a loss as to how to begin. From the angle of improving his strength, the acquirement of the corresponding ingredients of Bizarro Bane and Spirit World Plunderer depended on the subsequent request of the City of Silver's chief, and how long Miss Magician could receive the exact coordinates from her teacher. These were all dependent on external factors that Klein had no means of expediting. The only thing he could do was to try his best to digest the marionettist potion as quickly as possible. And after concluding most of the acting principles, the actual implementation was more important. Therefore, Klein believed that he needed to obtain 2 marionettes within a short span of time. He had previously been delaying it because he didn't have any good targets. It stemmed from him being in Backland with servants around him. Unless they were special marionettes, it was very difficult to hide their existences. And now, he was almost at the southern continent. He decided that as long as he identified an evil target who deserved the gallows, he would first transform them into his marionette until he had a better replacement. Perhaps using an ordinary marionette to complete a rather difficult task will accelerate the digestion. My standards for a marionette has dropped to its lowest. All it needs to know is Dutanese. That way, I don't have to hire an interpreter. After all, I can share their senses. Klein quickly made up his mind and planned on writing to Leonard Mitchell after he had a more advanced plan. East Balam, Colane City. Klein carried his luggage and stepped onto the dock, touching ground on the southern continent. He looked into the distance at the city that was built on terraces. He silently said to himself, I have to have 2 marionettes when I leave this place. And before that, he had one thing to do. It was to lose the tail of the followers that the military had arranged. The 2 gentlemen were rather good at being spies, but to Klein, they were as bright as fireflies in the night. This was because, no matter how well disguised they were, Klein could use his faceless ability of observation and his memory of a human's physical features and looks to recognize them at a glance. Chapter 907. The power of mysticism. Most of Colane City's buildings were built on paths that spiraled upwards. There would be squares or small towns in the middle or on rather flat, open spaces. Klein carried his luggage, and with his spiritual intuition as a seer, he randomly chose a direction to proceed in and found a relatively lively bar along the way. There weren't many carriages on the streets, and the rental types were a rare sight. The most popular means of transportation in East Balam was a coffin. This stemmed from their traditions of worshipping death. People viewed coffins as items that brought about serenity and peace. Therefore, Klein often saw people walking past him carrying a black coffin. The lids were lighter than the usual kind and were just like a carriage door that could be opened at any time. They're carried via 2, 4, or either people, or by horses or single-horned goats. Such a tradition is quite terrifying at night. It's not much better in the day. The entire city feels dark and creepy. Klein took in the scenery around him as he walked into the square. On the left was a cathedral of the Lord of Storms, and on the right were restaurants and bars. When he stopped in his tracks, a coffin being carried by 4 men was also lowered. As the lid was opened, The passenger inside the coffin stood up and took a step forward. He was a Northern Continent-style gentleman dressed in a white shirt and black vest. The gentleman's formal coat was slung against his arm, something he wore only after he left the coffin.
Then, Klein saw the man head straight for the Lord of Storms Cathedral and enter it.
This sure is quite discordant. Doesn't the Church of Storms enjoy changing the traditions of the colonies and forcefully implementing those of Lone? Why don't they do that in East Balam? Is it because the Death Pathway and Evernight Pathway are similar, so the Church of Storms wishes to preserve some of the traditions of death worship, so as to curb the proliferation of the Church of Evernight?
Klein nodded in thought as he turned to the buildings on the right, prepared to enter one of the bars there. Having experienced it personally, he came to the realization as to why the dressing style of the ancient Balam Empire was written as such in so many history books.
They enjoy wearing trousers, those that are light and breezy. They find creases beautiful. Isn't this to make it easier to lie in a coffin when outside?
Klein shook his head with a smile as he pushed open the heavy wooden door.
Squeezing through the drunkards, he walked towards the bar counter. And at this moment, the two military followers had deliberately opened up a distance from Dwayne Dantes to prevent themselves from being exposed. They had walked to the door side. Taking this brief reprieve, Klein suddenly switched directions and passed through the crowd like a fish in water, heading straight for the bar's back door. Although he didn't know Deutonese, he could read drawings on signs and knew where the washrooms and places where entry was forbidden to customers. After circling to a blind spot from the door, Klein quickly took off his coat and slung it on his arm. Immediately, with his golden cane, he reached out his palm to cover his face and slow down his pace. Turning directions again, he headed for the bar's entrance. After opening up a distance of nearly 10 meters from where he took off his coat, Klein lowered his face-shielding right hand to reveal a completely different face. His white sideburns, deep eyes, and elegant demeanor was all gone. He had switched to a common Loanese face that could be seen anywhere on the northern continent. With luggage and cane in hand, Klein walked staidly towards the two military followers. As they were looking for Dwayne Dantes, he walked past them and left the bar. Be it tracking or anti-tracking, they were both strong traits of a faceless. Returning to the square, Klein turned into a sloped alley that led to higher ground. He planned on finding a hotel elsewhere. As he walked on a rather deserted path, he suddenly heard a woman's frantic cries. The voice was only maintained for a very short moment before it was silenced. Although he didn't know what she was shouting, Klein could sense the horror, fear, and panic in her voice. Hence, he switched directions and entered a narrower and more deserted trail. In less than 10 seconds, he saw a local man in his 30s who was pressing against a 13- or 14-year-old girl in a secluded corner and was using violence against her. His skin was brownish, and he had rather soft facial features. Klein took a glance and slowed down his pace before stopping in the nearby shadows. At this moment, the girl's face was extremely horrified and distorted. However, regardless of how she struggled, she was unable to free herself and had only received a beating in response. Her tears and snot flowed out while her mouth was stuffed with cloth. All she could do was produce muffling sounds. At this moment, she was surprised that the rotten egg's attempts to take off her clothes had slowed down. Without having the time to consider what was happening, she subconsciously looked at the rotten egg and found that his eyes had widened. His facial muscles were writhing slowly, but he was unable to form a complete expression on his face. Then, his limbs twitched and paused as they continued doing what they were doing but were easily avoided. The girl instinctively pushed him, which had ended up having surprisingly excellent results. Freed, she immediately stood up and fled. However, she couldn't help but feel her legs go limp. After a few steps, she tripped over a stone and nearly fell to the ground. At this moment, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Reeling in anxiety, she fumbled to her feet. But almost immediately, the sounds of footsteps suddenly ceased. The girl subconsciously looked back only to see the rotten egg standing 2 meters away. His joints were making strange actions as though they were rusted. What's happening? The girl felt as though she was having a nightmare. The brown-skinned man struggled for a moment before quietening down. Revealing a smile, he said in Deutonese, "In the future, when you meet someone like me, remember to head for the nearest cathedral or somewhere where there's plenty of people." The girl was taken aback for a moment before she screamed. Turning around, she ran as fast as she could. Subconsciously, she chose to run in the direction of the square where the cathedral was. When the common silence of the deserted spot was restored,
The brown-skinned man turned to look at the nearby shadows where Klein walked out from.
A new marionette. His body isn't strong enough, and he's not nimble enough. He lacks beyonder powers and looks rather fierce. Apart from knowing Dutanese, he's completely useless, Klein simply evaluated.
If it wasn't because he was committing a crime and that I wasn't proficient in the local language, I would have buried him immediately. He couldn't help but make a comparison with his former marionette, Admiral of Blood Senor.
Senor was a wraith and was capable of mirror blink. He could hide in gold coins and reflective surfaces. I didn't need to worry that he would be seen by others. He also had shriek and the ability to possess others. Together with a marionettist, it's a perfect combination. More importantly, he also knew Dutanese.
Comparing this marionette and him is like the difference between a penny and 42,000 gold pounds.
I've no idea what his name is, and I can only use powers to sense some superficial thoughts. I have no way of obtaining deeper memories unless I encounter someone or something familiar. There would be a corresponding change in the spirit to release more information.
I'll just call him Ah Fu.
No, that's too Chinese.
Oaf it is.
Klein rubbed his temples and sighed. He needed to leave the area with his new marionette, Oaf, before the girl led the clergyman over. Before long, with the help of his marionette's translations, he found an inn to stay in at the border between Kolain City's flourishing and backward area. This place didn't need him to provide any proof of identity, even though Klein had already changed his appearance to that of a regular local. There's an even greater lack of administration management than the colonies at sea. Klein put down his luggage and threw most of the cash he brought with him above the grey fog, leaving only £50 for his daily expenses.
Meanwhile, having crossed the Berserk Sea, and without needing to be afraid of causing any further anomalies, he took down the copper whistle and iron cigar case from the mysterious space above the grey fog so as to make it easier for Mr. Azek to locate him. After finishing all of this and having had dinner on the liner, he had the spare time to seek out his second marionette.
As for how he could find one, Klein, who didn't understand Kolain City well enough, decided on using his traits as a seer and do so with mysticism means. With Oaf he left the inn. Klein snapped a branch of a Donningsman tree and used it as a dowsing rod. With great familiarity, he used cogitation and muttered, "Location of my new marionette."
In the silent environment, pairs of cold eyes seemed to pierce through the obstruction of the incorporeal and the corporeal and landed on the dowsing rod.
The branch fell to the ground and pointed in a direction. After advancing forward a little, he did another divination and followed his new revelation. 7 to 8 turns later, he arrived at a steep staircase. This staircase was connected to many roads in Kolain. One had to look up to see the top, and there was no one at all. The divination's revelation is pointing here. Why isn't there anyone here? The result isn't accurate because I didn't do a divination above the grey fog? But I'm already a sequence 5 marionettist. My divination abilities are definitely one of the best below that of high sequence beyonders. Klein frowned slightly as he surveyed the area, but he failed to find any targets. After some thought, he walked towards the staircase and sat in the shadows of the lowest step. He then waited in boredom despite a lack of confidence. After a few minutes, he stood up again and made Oaf sit where he was sitting. Then, Klein opened up a gap from him and hid 200 meters away in a hidden spot. Kolain City. Lower Lip District. Leonard Mitchell and Daly Simone arrived at a nearby district with the Red Gloves team captain, Soest.
With the night as cover, Soest emphasized the operation to all the members once again.
Our target this time is Ulika, who's living at Unit 13. He's a rather important member of the Numinous Episcopate, and is in charge of communicating with the different small teams in Backlund. Although all our intelligence points to him not being a demigod, I have applied for a Grade 1 sealed artifact to be safe. Her Excellency, Goddess's Eye, is also ready to provide her assistance to us at any time. Also, most of the residents of this district are locals. We have to be wary of them also being members of the Numinous Episcopate. Chapter 908. Not leaving any problems. Lower Lip District. 13 Canine Street. The plump Ulika was sitting on a sofa with his tiny dark brown eyes and skin. Wrapping a dried yellowed tobacco leaf and 10 different kinds of southern continent herbs and spices together, he cut it into long strips. Then, he held his self-made East Balam smoke pipe in his hand and brought it close to the matchstick his subordinate had lit. The end blackened and curled as it glowed red.
Biting at its end and taking a deep suck, Yulika slowly exhaled white smoke that was tainted with light blue hues. He looked at the visitor on the single-seater opposite him and said, "This is what a cigarette is."
A real cigarette.
The ones in the northern continent are only suitable for children.
The person sitting on the single-seater was a man in his 40s. He had a high nose, blue eyes, and gentle facial contours. His black hair was thick and curly. His skin color wasn't too dark, but neither was it fair. He resembled a mixed blood between someone from Lone and Balam.
He chuckled upon hearing that as he replied in Dutanese, "Unfortunately, I have zero interest in any kind of cigarettes. Enzo, you don't know how to enjoy life at all." Before Yulika could finish his sentence, his powerful spirituality that was a result of his pathway had warned him of some danger. The way it suddenly came and appeared in such a pressing manner made Yulika instantly determine that the problem wasn't trivial. He had yet to leap away from where he was sitting when all he saw was darkness. It was as though he could directly see the night sky outside. A strong sense of sleepiness overwhelmed him as he felt a level of serenity from the bottom of his heart. Along Canine Street, be it the houses with lit lamps or extinguished lamps, it became abnormally silent at that very moment. It was as though no living being lived in them, or that everyone had fallen asleep at the same moment. At this moment, the snoring and slumped Yulika suddenly leaped up. His eyes wore the strange combination of a reverie and lucidity. Behind him, a nearly illusory girl with pale skin was stuck to his back at some point in time. This girl's eyes were bluish-green, and her lips were jet black. Her eyes were silently looking to the side, and her ghastly pale and translucent limbs had drilled into Yulika's body as though she was a spirit that couldn't be shaken off. Her existence brought a chill to his soul body, making Yulika barely resist his abnormal sleepiness as he broke free from the influence of a nightmare. Before Yulika could completely regain his lucidity, he instinctively rushed to the staircase. Extending his palms, he exerted strength towards the front as though he was pushing a door that didn't exist. In a blink of an eye, a difficult-to-describe bronze door covered in mysterious patterns appeared in front of Yulika. It wobbled and creaked before cracking open a gap. The gap led to an endless darkness. In it were indescribable eyes that watched the outside world. Meanwhile, large amounts of squirming and strange objects that were still unrecognizable surged wildly from the gap. Yulika was about to continue exerting his strength to open the door and cause the terrifying world behind him to descend upon Canine Street, when he suddenly saw a pair of pale, translucent palms appear out of thin air. They passed through the deep darkness and pressed down on the interior of the door's gap. The palms didn't originate from anything. They weren't connected to a body, and the wrist was bloody. It was unknown who had severed them. Both parties exerted their strength as the mysterious bronze door stopped moving. It neither closed or opened further. High above Unit 13, Soest, who was already a spirit warlock, was floating in midair thanks to an invisible force. His hands carried a sundial made of gold as he slowly raised it high. When the golden sundial was finally raised above Soest's head, its resplendent glow flowed out and quickly outlined and became one. Suddenly, another sun seemed to appear in midair, directing all the light and heat at 13 Canine Street. None of that caused any damage as they penetrated through the building and landed above the bronze door, enveloping Yulika who was standing in front of it. Yulika instantly grimaced in extreme pain as the pale and nearly translucent girl let out a shrill scream, but it was stopped by the sunlight and drowned by the onslaught. She warped and quickly evaporated, producing wisps of black gases that dissipated into the sea of light. There wasn't a single spot inside the building that remained dark. After the sunlight faded, the indescribable bronze door had already vanished. On the ground was a black swollen corpse that was effusing pale yellow oil stains. With a boom, the corpse tore apart as a thin, tiny figure leaped out from inside. This figure had identical looks to Yulika, but its skin was raven black as though it was stained in ink. The surface of its body that stood at a height of around 1.2 to 1.3 meters had sticky pus flowing across it. The moment he appeared, he dashed for the staircase with a ludicrous speed. Burrowing into the cellar, he opened a secret trapdoor he had prepared in advance as he dashed forward as fast as he could. In just 10 seconds, the miniaturized black version of Yulika saw the entrance. Hope. He didn't lower his guard as he gently clenched his right fist, producing about 8 transparent illusory figures from his body. They were of all kinds of shapes and sizes, as though they were an abomination that fused the characteristics of humans, plants, and certain animals. Some held Yulika's arm,
Others lifted his feet as they took off in flight. Right on the heels of that, a mechanical switch was shifted.
Gears started rotating as the exit door flung open, leading to a silent and dark street corner. Further ahead were streets that stood on lower ground, and on the two sides of the streets were rows of houses. They appeared like the sea that churned with the light of the crimson moon. Yulika was just about to use the help of spirits to fly out of the secret passage and disappear into the other districts of Kolain City when his eyes reflected a foggy lake. The lake shimmered with light, producing a tranquil beauty. In the middle, concentric circles rippled out as beautiful and illusory figures floated up. This was a powerful type of spirit. Human legends often deemed it the goddess of the lake. Many a time, the strength of a spirit guide depended on the deceased or a natural spirit they found and controlled. It was the same with spirit warlocks. However, the inclination for spirit guides were the deceased, while for spirit warlocks, they were better at controlling natural spirits. At this moment, the strange transparent figures around Yulika uttered a monotonous sound of horror. Throwing away the arms and legs they were carrying, they drilled into the thin pitch-black body like the wind. With a crash, Yulika fell to the ground, but he didn't feel any pain, which was a result of intense sleepiness assaulting him. It made him fall asleep without realizing it. At the exit, Daily Simone, who was wearing a spirit medium robe, with her face made up with blue eyeshadow and blush, walked out of some unknown location. Looking at the 1.2-meter-tall Yulika, she said, "The deceased spirit he fused with is very strange. If it doesn't use a living human's body as a house, it will quickly dissipate. We need to make every second count in order to obtain information." In the shadows beside her, Leonard Mitchell walked out. He looked at Daily Simone in surprise and said, "Aren't you a spirit guide? How do you control a goddess of the lake? Aren't you a poet? Why don't you write poems?" Daily snapped back. On the other end of the street, on a gentle cliff, a figure quickly moved downwards with the protruded pieces of rock, quickly landing in the shadowy corners of Jaw Street below him. His skin was light-colored and his eyes were blue. He had thick raven-black hair that curled slightly. He was none other than Enzo, who had been a guest at Yulika's place at Lower Lip District's 13 Canine Street. Enzo wasn't a member of the numinous episcopate. He was one of the traitors of the Life School of Thought that had escaped under the enticement of the Rose School of Thought. Furthermore, he was neither a beyonder from the apothecary pathway that led to the vampire sequence, nor did he worship the primordial moon. He was only a person who didn't wish to accept the various rules set by his teacher and his teacher's teacher. He wished to lead a carefree life and take advantage of being a winner. Such a state of mind was strongly advocated by the Rose School of Thought's indulgence faction, so it didn't take long for him to formally join them, allowing him to freely satisfy all his various desires. This time, he was representing the Rose School of Thought to make contact with the numinous episcopate in Kolain and discuss the possibility of cooperating on certain matters. To his surprise, Tenebrous deceased Yulika had suffered a sudden raid by the Church of Evernight. It was a high-level raid. Thankfully, I'm good at anti-divination. The Church of Evernight members didn't know ahead of time that I was at Yulika's place, and they didn't pay too much attention to me. They just thought of me as Yulika's subordinate, allowing me to find a chance to escape the core region. Besides, that sunlight mainly purifies objects with the power of death, evil, and corruption. It didn't deal much damage to me. That's likely a demigod-level attack. Enzo walked to the shadows in the street and couldn't help but recall what had just happened. After fleeing quite a distance, he turned to look behind him and discovered no one was chasing him. He immediately heaved a sigh of relief and chuckled. A winner is a winner, the eternal winner. Enzo recovered his usual confidence as he proceeded down the street with a smile. Then, he turned to his left and quickly moved down the stairs. It was a steep and long staircase that reached many lower-level streets. In the vicinity of Canine Street, Soas suddenly opened his eyes and said to Leonard and Daily Simone, "There was a man named Enzo at Yulika's place. He's a member of the Rose School of Thought and doesn't have a low sequence. He probably enjoys quite an important position. You are to quickly search the surroundings and see if you can find any traces of him and try to capture him successfully. Don't leave any problems behind." As for the other Red Gloves and the local Nighthawks, they either had to capture the remaining numinous episcopate members or were already capturing them in dreams. They hoped to obtain first-hand news as quickly as possible. Only a few were left behind to watch for any accidents and protect their companions.
Yes, Captain Soest. Leonard didn't hesitate to agree. Daly grabbed at the wind and cupped her hand to her ear.
After listening for 2 to 3 seconds, she said, "The little guys around here tell me that someone did escape via the cliff."
You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.